Will you please sell us some paper at the old price, said William. Couldn't do that, I told you. A deal's a deal, the engravers have paid me, said Harry shortly. William opened his mouth and Goodmountain laid a hand on his arm. The king was clearly working his way to the end of a line of thought. Harry went over to the window again and stared pensively at the yard with its steaming piles. Then, "Oh, will you look at that?" he said, stepping back from the window in tremendous astonishment. "See that cart at the other gate down there?" They saw the cart. "I must have told the lads 100 times, don't leave a cart all laden up and ready to go right by an open gate like that. Someone'll nick it, I told them." William wondered who'd steal anything from the King of the Golden River, a man with all those red-hot compost heaps. "That's the last quarter of the order for the Engravers Guild," said Harry to the world in general. "I'd have to repay him if it got half-inched right out of my yard. I'll have to tell the foreman. He's getting forgetful these days." "We shall be leaving, William," said Goodmountain, grabbing William's arm again. "Why, we haven't—" "However can we repay you, Mr. King?" said the dwarf, dragging William towards the door. "The bridesmaids will be wearing Odin Nil, whatever that is," said the King of the Golden River. "Oh, and if I don't get $80 from you by the end of the month, you lads will be in deep—" The cigar did a double length of the mouth. "Trouble. Head downwards." 2 minutes later, the cart was creaking out of the yard under the curiously uninterested eyes of the troll foreman. "No, it's not stealing," said Goodmountain emphatically, shaking the reins. "The king pays the bastards back their money, and we pay him the old price. So we're all happy except for the Inquirer, and who cares about them?" "I didn't like the bit about the deep pause trouble," said William. "Head downwards." "I'm shorter than you, so I lose out either way up," said the dwarf. After watching the cart disappear, the king yelled downstairs for one of his clerks and told him to fetch a copy of the Times from bin 6. He sat impassively, except for the oscillating cigar, while the stained and crumpled paper was read to him. After a while his smile broadened, and he asked the clerk to read a few extracts again. "Ah," he said, when the man had finished, "I reckon that was it. The boy's a born muckraker. Shame for him he was born a long way from honest muck." "Shall I do a credit note for the engravers, Mr. King?" "Aye." "You reckon you'll get your money back, Mr. King?" Harry King usually didn't take this sort of thing from clerks. They were there to do the adding up, not discuss policy. On the other hand, Harry had made a fortune seeing the sparkle in the mire, and sometimes you had to recognise expertise when you saw it. "What colour's Odin Nil?" he said. "Oh, one of those difficult colours, Mr. King. A sort of light blue with a hint of green." "Could you get ink that colour?" "I could find out. It'd be expensive." The cigar made its traverse from one side of Harry King to the other. He was known to dote on his daughters, who he felt had suffered rather from having a father who needed to take 2 baths just to get dirty. "We shall just have to keep an eye on our little writing man," he said. "Tip off the lads, will you? I wouldn't like to see our Effie disappointed." The dwarfs were working on the press again, Saccharissa noted. It seldom stayed the same shape for more than a couple of hours. The dwarfs designed it as they went along. It looked to Saccharissa that the only tools a dwarf needed were his axe and some means of making fire. That'd eventually get him a forge, and with that he could make simple tools, and with those he could make complex tools, and with complex tools a dwarf could make more or less anything. A couple of them were rummaging around in the industrial junk that had been piled against the walls. A couple of metal mangles had been melted down for their iron already, and the rocking horses were being used to melt lead. 1 or 2 of the dwarfs had left the shed on mysterious errands too, and had returned carrying small sacks and furtive expressions. A dwarf is also very good at making use of things other people have thrown away, even if they haven't actually thrown them away yet. She was turning her attention to a report of the Knapp Hill Jolly Pals annual meeting, when a crash and some cursing in Ubervaltian, a good cursing language, made her run over to the cellar entrance. "Are you all right, Mr. Creek? Do you want me to go and get the dustpan and brush?" "Potrovaxi Jaltsi!" "Oh, sorry, Miss Saccharissa. There has been a minor pothole on the road to progress." Saccharissa made her way down the ladder. Otto was at his makeshift bench. Boxes of demons hung on the wall. Some salamanders dozed in their cages. In a big dark jar, land eels slithered. But a jar next to it was broken. "I was clumsy and knocked it over," said Otto, looking embarrassed. now the stupid eel has gone behind the bench. Is it right? Oh no, they are very lazy wretches. What is this you've been working on, Otto? Saccharissa said, turning to look closer at something big on the bench. He tried to dart in front of her. Oh, it is all very experimental. The way of making coloured plates? Yes, but this is just a crude lash-up. Saccharissa caught sight of a movement out of the corner of her eye. The escaped land eel, having got bored behind the bench, was making a very sluggish bid for new horizons, where an eel could wriggle proud and horizontal. Please don't, Otto began. Oh, it's all right. I'm not at all squeamish. Saccharissa's hand closed on the eel. She came to, with Otto's black handkerchief being flapped desperately in her face. Oh, goodness, she said, trying to sit up. Otto's face was a picture of such terror that Sacharissa forgot her own splitting headache for a moment. What's happened to you? She said. You look terrible. Otto jerked back, tried to stand up and half collapsed against the bench, clutching at his chest. Cheese, he moaned. Please get me some cheese, or a big apple, something to bite, please. There's nothing like that down here. Keep away from me, and do not breathe like that, Otto wailed. Like what? The bosom's going in and out and up and down like that. I am a vampire. A fainting young lady, please understand. The panting, the heaving of the bosoms. It calls something terrible from within. With a lurch, he pushed himself upright and gripped the black twist of ribbon from his lapel. But I will be strong, he screamed. I will not let everyone down. He stood, stiffly to attention, although slightly blurred because of the vibration shaking him from head to foot, and in a trembling voice sang, "Oh, will you come to the mission? Will you come, come? There's a nice cup of tea and a bun, bun, bun." The ladder was suddenly alive with tumbling dwarfs. "Are you all right, miss?" said Bodney, running forward with his axe. "Has he tried anything?" No, he's... "The drink that's in the living vein is not the drink for me." Sweat was running down Otto's face. He stood with one hand pressed over his heart. "That's right, Otto," shouted Sacharissa. "Fight it! Fight it!" She turned to the dwarfs. "Have any of you got a piece of raw meat?" "To life anew and temperance too, and to pure cold water will come." Veins were throbbing on Otto's pale head. "Got some fresh rat fillets upstairs?" muttered one of the dwarfs. "Cost me tuppence." "You get 'em right now, Gowdy," snapped Bodney. "This looks bad." "Oh, we can drink brandy and gin if it's handy, and we can serve whiskey and rum, but the drink we have for and we drink no more is the..." "Tuppence is tuppence, that's all I'm saying." "Look, he's starting to twitch," said Sacharissa. "And he can't sing either," said Gowdy. All right, I'm going. Sacharissa patted Otto's clammy hand. "You can beat it," she said urgently. "We're all here for you, aren't we, everyone? Aren't we?" Under her baleful gaze, the dwarfs responded with a chorus of half-hearted yeses, even though Bodney's expression suggested that he wasn't certain what Otto was here for. Gowdy came back with a small package. Sacharissa snatched it out of his hand and held it out to Otto, who reared back. "No, it's just rat," said Sacharissa. "Perfectly okay. You're allowed rat, right?" Otto froze for a moment and then snatched up the packet. He bit into it. In the sudden silence, Sacharissa wondered if she wasn't hearing a very faint sound, like the straw at the bottom of a milkshake. After a few seconds, Otto opened his eyes and then looked sidelong at the dwarfs. He dropped.
Ah, shit, my dust is already full. That sucks.
Where can I put my face, or what must you think of me? Sacharissa clapped with desperate enthusiasm. No, we're all very impressed. Aren't we, everyone? Out of Otto's sight, she waved one hand very deliberately at the dwarfs. There was another ragged chorus of agreement. "I mean, I have been going through cold bat now for more than 3 months, muttered Otto. "It is such a disgusting thing to break down now and..." "Oh, raw meat's nothing," said Sacharissa. "That's allowed, isn't it?" "Yes, but for a second there I nearly..." "Yes, but you didn't," said Sacharissa. "That's what's important. You wanted to and didn't." She turned to the dwarfs. "You can all go back to what you were doing," she said. "Otto is perfectly all right now." "Are you sure?" Bodney began, and then nodded. He'd rather have argued with a wild vampire than Sacharissa at this moment. "Right you are, miss." Otto sat down, wiping his forehead as the dwarfs filed out. Sacharissa patted his hand. "Do you want a drink?" "Oh, of water, Otto," said Sacharissa. No, everything is okay, I think." Oh dear, my goodness, I am so sorry. You think you are on top of it, and then suddenly it all comes back to you. What a day. Otto? Yes, miss? What actually happened when I grabbed the eel, Otto? He winced. I think this is maybe not the time. Otto, I saw things. There were flames and people and noise. Just for a moment. It was like watching a whole day go past in a second. What happened? Well, Otto said reluctantly, you know how salamanders absorb light? Yes, of course. Well, the eels absorb dark light. Not darkness exactly, but the light within darkness. Dark light, you see, dark light, well, it has not been properly studied. It is heavier than normal light, you see, so most of it is under the sea or in the really deep caves in Überwald. But there is always a little of it even in normal darkness. It really is very fascinating. It's a kind of special magic light, right? Could we just get more towards the point a bit? I have heard it said that dark light is the original light from which all other types of light came. Otto? He held up a pale hand. I have to tell you these things. Have you heard the theory that there is no such thing as the present? Because if it is divisible, then it cannot be the present. And if it is not divisible, then it cannot have a beginning which connects to the past and an end that connects to the future. The philosopher Heiderhollen tells us that the universe is just a cold soup of time, all time mixed up together. And what we call the passage of time is merely quantum fluctuations in the fabric of space-time. You have very long winter evenings in Überwald, don't you? You see, dark light is held to be the proof of this, Otto went on, ignoring her. It is light without time. What it illuminates, you see, is not necessarily now. He paused, as if waiting for something. Are you saying it takes pictures of the past? Said Saccharissa. Or the future? Or somewhere else? Of course, in reality, there is no difference. And all this you point at people's heads? Otto looked worried. I am finding strange side things. The dwarfs say that dark light has odd effects, but they are very superstitious people, so I did not take that seriously. However, he scrabbled among the debris on his bench and picked up an iconograph.
End of CD 5. CD 6.
Oh dear. This is so complicated, said Otto. Look, the philosopher Kling says the mind has a dark side and a light side, you see, and dark light is seen by the dark eyes of the mind. He paused again. Yes, said Saccharissa politely. I was waiting for the roll of thunder, said the vampire. But alas, this is not Überwald. You've lost me there, said Saccharissa. Well, you see, if I was to say something portentous like the dark eyes of the mind back home in Überwald, there would be a sudden crash of thunder, said Otto. And if I was to point at a castle on a towering crag and say, yonder is the castle, a wolf would be bound to howl mournfully. He sighed. In the old country, the scenery is psychotropic and knows what is expected of it. Here, alas, people just look at you in a funny way. All right, all right. It's a magical light that takes uncanny pictures, said Saccharissa. That's a very newspaper way of putting it, said Otto politely. He showed her the iconograph. Look at this one. I wanted a picture of a dwarf working in the patrician study, and I got this. The picture was a wash of blurs and swirls, and there was a vague outline of a dwarf lying down on the floor and examining something. But superimposed on this was quite a clear picture of Lord Vetinari. Two pictures of Lord Vetinari, each figure staring at the other. Well, it's his office, and he's always in there, said Saccharissa. Does the magic light pick that up? Maybe, said Otto. We know that what is physically there is not always what is really there. Look at this one. He handed her another picture. Oh, that's a good one of William, she said, in the cellar, and that's Lord de Word standing just behind him, isn't it? Is it? Said the vampire. I don't know the man. I do know that he was not in the cellar when I took the picture. But you only have to talk to Mr. William for any length of time to see that, in a way, his father is always looking over his shoulder. That's creepy. Saccharissa looked around the cellar. The stone walls were old and stained, but they certainly weren't blackened. I just saw people, men fighting, flames and silver rain. How could it rain underground? I do not know. That's why I study dark light. Noises above suggested that William and Goodmountain had returned. I wouldn't mention this to anyone else, said Saccharissa, heading for the ladder. We've got enough to deal with. That's creepy. There was no name outside the bar because those who knew what it was didn't need one. Those who didn't know what it was shouldn't go in. Ankh-Morpork's undead were, on the whole, a law-abiding bunch, if only because they knew the law paid them a certain amount of special attention. But if you walked into the place known as Beers on a dark night and had no business there, who would ever know? For the vampires, those, that is, who weren't gathered around the harmonium at the Temperance Mission, nervously singing songs about how much they liked cocoa, it was a place to hang up. For the werewolves, it was where you let your hair down. For the bogeymen, it was a place to come out of the closet. For the ghouls, it did a decent meat pasty and chips. All eyes, and that was not the same thing as the number of heads multiplied by 2, turned to the door when it creaked open. The newcomers were surveyed from dark corners. They wore black, but that didn't mean anything. Anyone could wear black. They walked up to the bar and Mr. Pin rapped on the stained wood. The barman nodded. The important thing he'd found was to make sure ordinary people paid for their drinks as they bought them. It wasn't good business to let them run a tab. That showed an unwarranted optimism about the future. What can I... he began, before Mr. Tulip's hand caught him round the back of the neck and rammed his head down hard on the bar. I am not having a nice day, said Mr. Pin, turning to the world in general, and Mr. Tulip here suffers from unresolved personality conflicts. Has anyone got any questions? An indistinct hand rose in the gloom. What, cook? Said a voice. Mr. Pin opened his mouth to reply and then turned to his colleague, who was examining the bar's array of very strange drinks. All cocktails are sticky. The ones in beers tended to be stickier. It says kill the cook, said the voice. Mr. Tulip rammed 2 long kebab skewers into the bar, where they vibrated. What cooks have you got? He said. It's a good apron, said the voice in the gloom. It is the envy of all my friends, Mr. Tulip growled. In the silence, Mr. Pin heard the unseen drinkers calculating the likely number of friends of Mr. Tulip. It was not a calculation that would involve a simple thinker taking off their shoes. Ah, right, said someone. Now, we don't want any trouble with you people, said Mr. Pin. Not as such. We simply wish to meet a werewolf. Another voice in the gloom said, Why? Got a job for him, said Mr. Pin. There was some muffled laughter in the darkness, and a figure shuffled forward. It was about the size of Mr. Pin. It had pointy ears. It had a hairstyle that clearly continued to its ankles, inside its ragged clothes. Tufts of hair stuck out of holes in its shirt and densely thatched the backs of its hands. Part werewolf, it said. Which part? That's a funny joke. Can you talk to dogs? The self-confessed part werewolf looked around at its unseen audience, and for the first time Mr. Pin felt a twinge of disquiet. The sight of Mr. Tulip's slowly spinning eye and throbbing forehead were not having their usual effect. There were rustlings in the dark. He was sure he heard a snigger. Yup, said the werewolf. The hell with this, thought Mr. Pin. He pulled out his pistol bow in one practiced movement and held it an inch from the werewolf's face. This is tipped with silver, he said. He was amazed at the speed of movement. Suddenly a hand was against his neck and 5 sharp points pressed into his skin. This ain't, said the werewolf. Let's see who finishes squeezing first, eh? Yeah, right, said Mr. Tulip, who was also holding something. That's just a barbecue fork, said the werewolf, giving it barely a glance. You want to see how fast I can throw it, said Mr. Tulip. Mr. Pin tried to swallow, but only got halfway. Dead people, he knew, didn't squeeze that hard, but it was at least 10 steps to the door, and the space seemed to be getting wider by the heartbeat. Hey, he said, there's no need for this, right? Why don't we all loosen up? And hey, it would help me to talk to you if you were your normal shape. No problem, my friend. The werewolf winced and shuddered, but without at any point letting go of Mr. Pin's neck. The face contorted so much, features flowing together, that even Mr. Pin, who in other circumstances quite enjoyed that sort of thing, had to look away. This allowed him to see the shadow on the wall. It was, contrary to expectations, growing. So were its ears. Any questions? Said the werewolf. Now its teeth seriously interfered with its speech. Its breath smelled even worse than Mr. Tulip's suit. Ah, said Mr. Pin, standing on tiptoe. I think we've come to the wrong place. I think that also. At the bar, Mr. Tulip bit the top off a bottle in a meaningful way. Once again, the room was filled with the ferocious silence of calculation and the personal mathematics of profit and loss. Mr. Tulip smashed a bottle against his forehead. At this point, he did not appear to be paying much attention to the room. He just happened to have a bottle in his hand, which he did not need any more. Putting it on the bar would have required an unnecessary expenditure of hand-eye coordination. People recalculated. Is he human? Said the werewolf. Well, of course, human is just a word, said Mr. Pin. He felt weight slowly press down onto his toes as he was lowered to the floor. I think perhaps we'll just be going, he said carefully. Right, said the werewolf. Mr. Tulip had smashed open a big jar of pickles, or at least things that were long, chubby and green, and was trying to insert one up his nose. If we wanted to stay, we would, said Mr. Pin. Right, but you want to go. So does your friend, said the werewolf. Mr. Pin backed towards the door. Mr. Tulip, we have business elsewhere, he said. Sheesh, take the damn pickle out of your nose, will you? We're supposed to be professionals. That's not a pickle, said a voice in the dark. Mr. Pin was uncharacteristically thankful when the door slammed behind them. To his surprise, he also heard the bolts shoot home. Well, that could have gone better, he said, brushing dust and hair off his coat. What now? Said Mr. Tulip. Time to think of a plan B, said Mr. Pin. Why don't we just it people until someone tells us where the dog is, said Mr. Tulip. Tempting, said Mr. Pin, but we'll leave that for plan C. Baggery. They both turned. Bent treacle edges, I told them, said foul old Ron, lurching across the street, a wad of Timeses under one arm and the string of his nondescript mongrel in his other hand. He caught sight of the new firm. Hargle Garley Europe, he said. They are Benip. You gents want a paper? It seemed to Mr. Pin that the last sentence, while in pretty much the same voice, had an intrusive, not quite right quality. Apart from anything else, it made sense. You got some change? He said to Mr. Tulip, patting his pockets. You're gonna buy one, said his partner. There's a time and a place, Mr. Tulip, a time and a place. Here you are, mister. Millennium, hand and shrimp, Baggery, said Ron, adding, much obliged, gents. Mr. Pin opened the Times. This thing has got... He stopped and looked closer. Have you seen this dog? He said. Shish. He stared at Ron. You sell lots of these things? He said. Wheedle the slops, I told him. Yeah, hundreds. There it was again, the slight sensation of two voices. Hundreds, said Mr. Pin. He looked down at the paper seller's dog. It looked pretty much like the one in the paper, but all terriers looked alike. Anyway, this one was on a string. Hundreds, he said again, and read the short article again. He stared. I think we have a plan B, he said. At ground level, the newspaper seller's dog watched them carefully as they walked away. That was too close for comfort, it said, when they turned the corner. Foul old Ron put down his papers in a puddle and pulled a cold sausage from the depths of his hulking coat. He broke it into 3 equal pieces. The Ankh-Morpork Times. The truth shall make ye Fred. Extra. Have you seen this dog? $25 reward for information. William had dithered over that, but the watch had supplied quite a good drawing, and he felt right now that a little friendly gesture in that direction would be a good idea. If he found himself in deep trouble head downwards, he'd need someone to pull him out. He had rewritten the patrician story too, adding as much as he was certain of, and there wasn't much of that. He was, frankly, stuck. Saccharissa had penned a story about the opening of the Inquirer. William had hesitated about this too, but it was news after all. They couldn't just ignore it, and it filled some space. Besides, he liked the opening line, which began, "A would-be rival to Ankh-Morpork's old-established newspaper, The Times, has opened in Gleam Street." "You're getting good at this," he said, looking across the desk. "Yes," she said. "Now I know that if I see a naked man, I should definitely get his name and address, because," William joined in the chorus, "names sell papers." He sat back and drank the really horrible tea the dwarfs made. Just for a moment there was an unusual feeling of bliss. Strange word, he thought. One of those words that describes something that does not make a noise, but if it did make a noise, would sound just like that. Bliss. It's like the sound of a soft meringue melting gently on a warm plate. Here and now, he was free. The paper was put to bed, tucked up, had its prayers listened to. It was finished. The crew were already filing back in for more copies, cursing and spitting. They'd commandeered a variety of old trolleys and trams to cart their papers out into the streets. Of course, in an hour or so, the mouth of the press would be hungry again, and he'd be back pushing the huge rock uphill, just like that character in mythology. What was his name? Who was that hero who was condemned to push a rock up a hill, and every time he got it to the top, it rolled down again, he said. Saccharissa didn't look up. "Someone who needed a wheelbarrow," she said, spiking a piece of paper with some force. William recognised the voice of someone who still has an annoying job to do. "What are you working on?" he said. "A report from the Ankh-Morpork Recovering Accordion Players Society," she said, scribbling fast. "Is there something wrong with it?" "Yes, the punctuation. There isn't any. I think we might have to order an extra box of commas." "Why are you bothering with it, then?" 26 people are mentioned by name. As accordionists? Yes. Would they complain? They didn't have to play the accordion. Oh, and there was a big crash on Broadway. A cart overturned and several tons of flour fell onto the road, causing a couple of horses to rear and upset their cartload of fresh eggs. And that caused another cart to shed 30 churns of milk. So, what do you think of this as a headline? She held up a piece of paper on which she'd written, "City's Biggest Cake Mix-Up." William looked at it. Yes, somehow it had everything. The sad attempt at humour was exactly right. It was just the sort of thing that would cause much mirth around Mrs. Arcanum's table. "Lose the second exclamation mark," he said. "Otherwise, I think it's perfect. How did you hear about it?" "Oh, Constable Fiddymont dropped in and told me," said Saccharissa. She looked down and shuffled papers unnecessarily. "I think he's a bit sweet on me, to tell you the truth." A tiny, hitherto unregarded bit of William's ego instantly froze solid. An awful lot of young men seemed happy to tell Saccharissa things. He heard himself say, "Vimes doesn't want any of his officers to speak to us." Yes, well, I don't think telling me about a lot of smashed eggs counts, does it? Yes, but... Anyway, I can't help it if young men want to tell me things, can I? I suppose not, but... Anyway, that's it for tonight. Saccharissa yawned. I'm going home. William got up so quickly he skinned his knees on the desk. "I'll walk you there," he said. "Good grief, it's nearly 7:45, said Saccharissa, putting on her coat. "Why do we keep on working?" "Because the press doesn't go to sleep," said William. As they stepped out into the silent street, he wondered if Lord Vetinari had been right about the press. There was something compelling about it. It was like a dog that stared at you until you fed it. A slightly dangerous dog. Dog bites man, he thought. But that's not news. That's oaths. Saccharissa let him walk her to the end of the street, where she made him stop. "It'll embarrass Grandfather if you're seen with me," she said. "I know it's stupid, but neighbours, you know. And all this guild stuff. I know, The air hung heavy for a moment as they looked at each other. I don't know how to put this," said William, knowing that sooner or later it had to be said. "But I ought to say that, though you are a very attractive girl, you're not my type." She gave him the oldest look he'd ever seen, and then said, "That took a lot of saying, and I would like to thank you. I just thought that with me and you working together all the time..." "No, I'm glad one of us said it," she said. "And with smooth talk like that, I bet you have the girls just lining up, right? See you tomorrow." He watched her walk down the street to her house. After a few seconds, a lamp went on in an upper window. By running very fast, he arrived back at his lodgings just late enough for a look from Mrs. Arcanum, but not so late as to be barred from the table for impoliteness. Serious latecomers had to eat their supper at the table in the kitchen. It was curry tonight. And one of the strange things about eating at Mrs. Arcanum's was that you got more leftovers than you got original meals. That is, there were far more meals made up from what were traditionally considered the prudently usable remains of earlier meals, stews, bubble and squeak, curry, than there were meals at which those remains could have originated. The curry was particularly strange, since Mrs. Arcanum considered foreign parts only marginally less unspeakable than private parts, and therefore added the curious yellow curry powder with a very small spoon, lest everyone should suddenly tear their clothes off and do foreign things. The main ingredients appeared to be swede and gritty rainwater-tasting sultanas, and the remains of some cold mutton, although William couldn't remember when they'd had the original mutton at any temperature. This was not a problem for the other lodgers. Mrs. Arcanum provided big helpings, and they were men who measured culinary achievement by the amount you got on your plate. It might not taste astonishing, but you went to bed full, and that was what mattered. At the moment, the news of the day was being discussed. Mr. McElduff had bought the Inquirer and both editions of the Times, in his role as keeper of the fire of communication. It was generally agreed that the news in the Inquirer was more interesting, although Mrs. Arcanum ruled that the whole subject of snakes was not one for the dinner table, and papers ought not to be allowed to disturb people like this. Rains of insects and so on, though, fully confirmed everyone's view of distant lands. Olds, thought William, forensically dissecting a sultana. His lordship was right. Not news, but olds. Telling people what they think they already know is true. The patrician, it was agreed, was a shifty one. The meeting concurred that they were all alike, the lot of them. Mr. Windling said the city was in a mess, and there ought to be some changes. Mr. Longshaft said that he couldn't speak for the city, but from what he had heard, the gemstone business had been very brisk of late. Mr. Windling said that it was all right for some. Mr. Prone put forth the opinion that the watch could not find their bottom with both hands, a turn of phrase that almost earned him a place at the kitchen table to finish his meal. It was agreed that Vetinari had done it all right, and should be put away. The main course adjourned at 8:45 p.m. and was followed by disintegrating plums in runny custard, Mr. Prone getting slightly fewer plums as an unspoken reprimand. William went up to his room early. He had adapted to Mrs. Arcanum's cuisine, but nothing except radical surgery would make him like her coffee. He lay down on the narrow bed in the dark. Mrs. Arcanum supplied one candle weekly, and what with one thing and another, he'd forgotten to buy any extra, and tried to think. Mr. Slant walked across the floor of the empty ballroom, his feet echoing on the wood. He took his position in the circle of candlelight with a slight twanging of nerves. As a zombie, he was always a little edgy about fire. He coughed. "Well," said a chair.
"They didn't get the dog,"
said Mr. Slant.
"In all other respects, I have to say they did a masterly job.
How bad could it be if the watch found it?
As I understand it, the dog in question is quite old,"
said Mr. Slant into the candlelight.
"I have instructed Mr. Pym to look for it, but I don't believe he will find it easy to get access to the city's canine underground."
There are other werewolves here, aren't there?
"Yes,"
said Mr. Slant smoothly.
"but they won't help. There are very few of them, and Sergeant Angua of the Watch is very important in the werewolf community. They won't help strangers, because she will find out."
And bring the watch down on them?
"I believe she would not bother with the watch," said Slant.
The dog is probably in some dwarf stew pot by now, said a chair. There was general laughter. If things go wrong, said a chair, who do these men know?
"They know me," said Mr. Slant. "I would not worry unduly. Vimes works by the rules."
I've always understood him to be a violent and vicious man, said a chair.
"Quite so. And because this is what he knows himself to be, he always works by the rules. In any case, the guilds will be meeting tomorrow."
Who will be the new patrician, said a chair.
"That will be a matter for careful discussion and a consideration of all shades of opinion,"
said Mr. Slant. His voice could have oiled watches. Mr. Slant, said a chair.
"Yes?"
Do not try that on us. It is going to be Scrope, isn't it?
"Mr. Scrope is certainly well thought of by many of the leading figures in the city,"
said the lawyer. Good. And the musty air was loud with unspoken conversation. Absolutely no one needed to say, a lot of the most powerful men in the city owed their positions to Lord Vetinari. And nobody replied, certainly, but to the kind of men who seek power, gratitude has very poor keeping qualities. The kind of men who seek power tend to deal with matters as they are. They would never try to depose Vetinari, but if he was gone, then they would be practical. No one said, "Will anyone speak up for Vetinari?" Silence replied, "Oh, everyone. They'll say things like, 'Poor fellow, it was the strain of office, you know.' They'll say, 'It's the quiet ones that crack.' They'll say, 'Quite so. We should put him somewhere where he can do no harm to himself or others, don't you think?' They'll say, 'Perhaps a small statue would be in order too.' They'll say, 'The least we can do is call off the watch. We owe him that much.' They'll say, 'We must look to the future.' And so, quietly, things change. No fuss, and very little mess. No one said, 'Character assassination, what a wonderful idea. Ordinary assassination only works once, but this one works every day.' A chair did say, 'I wondered whether Lord Downey or even Mr. Boggis.' Another chair said, 'Oh, come now, why should they? Much better this way.' 'True, true. Mr. Scrope is a man of fine qualities.' 'A good family man, I understand. Listens to the common people.' 'Not just to the common people, I trust.' 'Oh no, he's very open to advice from informed focus groups.' 'He'll need plenty of that.' No one said, 'He's a useful idiot.' 'Nevertheless, the watch will have to be brought to heel.' 'Vimes will do what he is told. He must do. Scrope will be at least as legitimate a choice as Vetinari was. Vimes is the kind of man who must have a boss because that gives him legitimacy.' Slant coughed. 'Is that all, gentlemen?' he said. 'What about the Ankh-Morpork Times?' said a chair. 'Bit of a problem shaping up there?' 'People find it amusing,' said Mr. Slant, 'and nobody takes it seriously. The Inquirer outsells it 2-1 already, after just one day. And it is underfinanced. And it has, difficulty with supplies.' 'Good tale in the Inquirer about that woman and the snake,' said a chair. 'Was there?' said Mr. Slant. The chair that had first mentioned the Times had something on its mind. 'I'd feel happier if a few likely lads smashed up the press,' it said. 'That would attract attention,' said a chair. 'The Times wants attention. The writer craves to be noticed.' 'Oh, well, if you insist.' 'I would not dream of insisting, but the Times will collapse,' said the chair. And this was the chair that the other chairs listened to. 'The young man is also an idealist. He has yet to find out what's in the public interest, is not what the public is interested in.' 'Say again?' 'I mean, gentlemen, that people probably think he's doing a good job, but what they are buying is the Inquirer. The news is more interesting. Did I ever tell you, Mr. Slant, that a lie will go round the world before the truth has got its boots on?' 'A great many times, sir,' said Slant with slightly less than his usual keen diplomacy. He realized this and added, 'Valuable insight, I'm sure.' 'Good.' The most important chair sniffed. 'Keep an eye on our workmen, Mr. Slant.' It was midnight in the Temple of Om in the Street of Small Gods, and one light burned in the vestry. It was a candle in a very heavy ornate candlestick, and it was, in a way, sending a prayer to heaven. The prayer, from the Gospel according to the miscreants, was, 'Don't let anyone find us pinching this stuff.' Mr. Pin rummaged in a cupboard. 'I can't find anything in your size,' he said. 'It looks as though... Oh, no, sheesh. Incense is for burning.' Tulip sneezed, pebble-dashing the opposite wall with sandalwood. 'You could have told me before,' he muttered. 'I've got some papers.' 'Have you been chasing the oven cleaner again?' said Mr. Pin accusingly. 'I want you focused, understand? Now, the only thing I can find in here that will fit you—' The door creaked open, and a small, elderly priest wandered into the room. Mr. Pin instinctively grasped the big candlestick. 'Hello, are you here for the midnight service?' said the old man, blinking in delight. This time it was Tulip who grabbed Mr. Pin's arm as he raised the candlestick. 'Are you mad? What kind of person are you?' he growled. 'What? We can't let him.' Mr. Tulip snatched the silver stick out of his partner's hand. 'I mean, look at that thing, will you?' he said, ignoring the bemused priest. 'That's a genuine Cellini, 500 years old. Look at the chasing work on that snuffer, will you? Sheesh, to you it's nothing more than £5 of silver, right?' Actually, it's a fatog, said the old priest, who still hadn't yet got up to mental speed. What, the pupil? Said Mr. Tulip, his eyes ceasing their spin out of surprise. He turned the candlestick over and looked at the base. Hey, that's right. There's the Cellini mark, but it's stamped with a little F, too. First time I've ever seen his ing early stuff. He was a better ing silversmith, too. It's just a shame he had such a ing stupid name. Do you know how much that'd sell for, Reverend? We thought about $70, said the priest, looking hopeful. It was in a lot of furniture that an old lady left the church. Really, we kept it for sentimental value. Have you still got the box it came in? Said Mr. Tulip, turning the candlestick over and over in his hands. He did wonderful ing presentation boxes. Cherry wood. No, I don't think so. Ing shame. Is it still worth anything? I think we've got another one somewhere. To the right collector, maybe $4,000 ing dollars, said Mr. Tulip. But I reckon you could get 12,000 if you'd got the ing pair. Futtergy's very collectible at the moment. 12,000, burbled the old man. His eyes gleamed with a deadly sin. Could be more, Mr. Tulip nodded. It's a ing delightful piece. I feel quite privileged to have seen it. He looked sourly at Mr. Pin. And you are going to use it as a ing blunt instrument. He put the candlestick reverentially on the vestry table and buffed it carefully with his sleeve. Then he spun round and brought his fist down hard on the head of the priest, who folded up with a sigh. And they were just keeping it in a ing cupboard, he said. Honestly, I could ing spit. Do you want to take it with us? Said Mr. Pin, stuffing clothes into a bag. Nah, all the fences round here probably just melted down for the silver, said Mr. Tulip. I couldn't have something like that on my ing conscience. Let's find this ing dog and get right out of this dump, shall we? It makes me so ing despondent. William turned over, woke up, and stared wide-eyed at the ceiling. 2 minutes later, Mrs. Arcanum came downstairs and into the kitchen, armed with a lamp, a poker, and most importantly, with her hair in curlers. The combination would be a winner against all but the most iron-stomached intruder. Mr. De Word, what are you doing? It's midnight. William glanced up and then went back to opening cupboards. Sorry I knocked the saucepans over, Mrs. Arcanum. I'll pay for any damage. Now, where are the scales? Scales? Scales! Kitchen scales, where are they? Mr. De Word, where are the damned scales, Mrs. Arcanum? Said William desperately. Mr. De Word, for shame! The future of the city hangs in the balance, Mrs. Arcanum. Perplexity slowly took the place of stern affront. What? In my scales? Yes, it could very well be. Well, they're in the pantry by the flour bag. The old city, you say? Quite possibly. William felt his jacket sag as he forced the big brass weights into his pocket. Use the old potato sack, do, said Mrs. Arcanum, now quite flustered by events. William grabbed the sack, rammed everything in and ran for the door. The university and the river and everything, said the landlady nervously. Yes, indeed. Mrs. Arcanum set her jaw. You will wash it out thoroughly afterwards, won't you? She said to his retreating back. William's progress slowed towards the end of the road. Big iron kitchen scales and a full set of weights aren't carried lightly. But that was the point, wasn't it? Weight. He ran and walked and dragged them through the freezing, foggy night until he reached Gleam Street. The lights were still on in the Inquirer building. How late do you need to stay up when you can make up the news as you go along, thought William. But this is real. Heavy, even. He hammered on the door of the Times shed until the dwarf opened up. The dwarf was amazed to see a frantic William De Word rush past and drop the scales and weights on a desk. Please get Mr. Goodmountain up. We've got to get out another edition. And can I have $10, please? It took Goodmountain to sort things out when, night-shirted but still firmly helmeted, he clambered out of the cellar. No, $10, William was explaining to the bewildered dwarfs. $10 coins, not $10 worth of money. Why? To see how much $70,000 weigh. We haven't got $70,000. Look, even $1 coin would do, said William patiently. $10 would just be more accurate, that's all. I can work it out from there. 10 assorted coins were eventually procured from the dwarf's cash box and were duly weighed. Then William turned to a fresh page in his notebook and bent his head in ferocious calculation. The dwarfs watched him solemnly, as if he were conducting an alchemical experiment. Finally, he looked up from his figures, the light of revelation in his eyes. That's almost a third of a ton, he said. That's how much $70,000 coins weigh. I suppose a really good horse could carry that and a rider, but Vetinari walks with a stick. You saw him. It'd take him forever to load the horse up, and even if he got away, he could hardly travel fast. Vimes must have worked it out. He said the facts were stupid facts. Goodmountain had stationed himself before the rows of cases. Ready when you are, Chief, he said. All right. William hesitated. He knew the facts, but what did the facts suggest? Make the heading, Who Framed Lord Vetinari? And then the story starts, William watched the hand pounce and grab amongst the little boxes of type. Ankh-Morport City Watch now believe that at least one other person was involved in the fracas, suggested Goodmountain. No. Rumpus? In the attack at the palace on Tuesday morning. William waited until the dwarf had caught up. It was getting easier and easier to read the words forming in Goodmountain's hands as the fingers jumped from box to box. M-I-G-H-T. You got an M for an N there, he said. Oh yes, sorry, carry on. Evidence suggests that far from attacking his clerk as believed, Lord Vetinari may have discovered a crime in progress. The hand flew across the type. C-R-I-M-E, space, I-N. It stopped. You sure about this? Said Goodmountain. No, but it's as good a theory as any other, said William. That horse hadn't been loaded to escape. It had been loaded to be discovered. Someone had some plan and it went wrong. I'm sure of that at least. Right, new paragraph. A horse in the stables had been loaded with 1/3 of a ton of coins, but in his current state of health, the patrician, one of the dwarfs had lit the stove, another was stripping out the forms that contained the last edition. The room was coming alive again. That's about 8 inches plus the heading, said Goodmountain when William had finished. That should rattle people. You want to add any more stuff? Miss Saccharissa did something about Lady Salachi's ball, and there's a few small things. William yawned. He didn't seem to be getting enough sleep these days. Put them in, he said. And there's this clax from Lanka that came in when you'd gone home, said the dwarf. That'll cost us another 50p for the messenger. You remember you sent a clax this afternoon about snakes? He added, in the face of William's blank expression. William read the flimsy sheet of paper. The message had been carefully transcribed in the neat handwriting of the semaphore operator. It was probably the strangest message yet sent on the new technology. King Verence of Lanka had also mastered the idea that the clax charged by the word. Women of Lanka, Rupert, not inhabit bearing snakes, stop. Children born this month, William Weaver, Constance Thatcher, Catastrophe Carter, all plus arms, legs, minus scales, fangs. Ah, we have them, said William. Give me 5 minutes and I'll put together a story on this. We shall soon see if the sword of truth can't beat the dragon of lies. Bodney gave him a kind look. Didn't you say a lie can run round the world before the truth has got its boots on? He said. But this is the truth. So, where's its boots? Goodmountain nodded to the other dwarfs who were yawning. You get back to bed, lads. I'll put it all together. He watched them disappear down the ladder to the cellar. Then he sat down, took out a small silver box and opened it. Snuff, he said, offering the box to William. Best thing you humans ever invented. Watson's Red Roasted. Clears the mind a treat, no? William shook his head. What are you doing all this for, Mr. De Word? Said Goodmountain, taking a monstrous suction of snuff up each nostril. What do you mean? I'm not saying we don't appreciate it, mark you, said Goodmountain. It's keeping the money coming in. The jobbing stuff is drying up more every day. Seems like every engraving shop was poised to go over to printing. All we did was give the young rips an opening. They'll get us in the end, though. They've got money behind them. I don't mind saying some of the lads are talking about selling up and going back to the lead mines. You can't do that. Ah, well, said Goodmountain. You mean you don't want us to. I understand that. But we've been putting money by. We should be all right. I dare say we can flog the press to someone. We might have a spot of cash to take back home. That's what this was all about, money. What were you doing it for? Me? Because... William stopped. The truth was he'd never decided to do anything. He'd never really made that kind of decision in his whole life. One thing had just gently led to another, and then the press had to be fed. It was waiting there now. You worked hard, you fed it, and it was still just as hungry an hour later, and out in the world all your work was heading for bin 6 in Piss Harry's. And that was only the start of its troubles. Suddenly, he had a proper job, with working hours, and yet everything he did was only as real as a sand castle, on a beach where the tide only ever came in. I don't know, he admitted. I suppose it's because I'm no good at anything else. Now I can't imagine doing anything else. But I heard your family's got pots of money. Mr. Goodmountain, I'm useless. I was educated to be useless. What we've always been supposed to do is hang around until there's a war and do something really stupidly brave and then get killed. What we've mainly done is hang on to things. Ideas, mostly. You don't get on with them, then. Look, I don't need a heart-to-heart about this, can you understand? My father is not a nice man. Do I have to draw you a picture? He doesn't much like me, and I don't like him. If it comes to that, he doesn't like anyone very much, especially dwarfs and trolls. No law says you have to like dwarfs and trolls, said Goodmountain. Yes, but there ought to be a law against disliking them the way he does. Ah, now you've drawn me a picture. Maybe you've heard the term lesser races, and now you've coloured it in. He won't even live in Ankh-Morpork anymore, says it's polluted. That's observant of him. No, I mean... Oh, I know what you mean, said Goodmountain. I've met humans like him. You said this was all about money, said William. Is that true? The dwarf nodded at the ingots of lead stacked up neatly by the press. We wanted to turn lead into gold, he said. We'd got a lot of lead, but we need gold. William sighed. My father used to say that gold is all dwarfs think about. Pretty much. The dwarf took another pinch of snuff. But where people go wrong is... See, if all a human thinks about is gold, well, he's a miser. If a dwarf thinks about gold, he's just being a dwarf. It's different. What do you call them black humans that live in Hawonderland? I know what my father calls them, said William, but I call them people who live in Hawonderland. Do you really? Well, I hear tell there's one tribe where, before he can get married, a man has to kill a leopard and give the skin to the woman. It's the same as that. A dwarf needs gold to get married. What, like a dowry? But I thought dwarfs didn't differentiate between... No, the two dwarfs getting married each buy the other dwarf off their parents. Buy? Said William. How could you buy people? See? Cultural misunderstanding once again, lad. It costs a lot of money to raise a young dwarf to marriageable age. Food, clothes, chain mail, it all adds up over the years. It needs repaying. After all, the other dwarf is getting a valuable commodity. And it has to be paid for in gold. That's traditional. Or gems, they're fine too. You must have heard our saying, worth his weight in gold. Of course, if a dwarf's been working for his parents, that gets taken into account on the other side of the ledger. Why, a dwarf who's left off marrying until late in his life is probably owed quite a tidy sum in wages. You're still looking at me in that funny way. It's just that we don't do it like that, mumbled William. Goodmountain gave him a sharp look. Don't you now, he said. Really? What do you use instead then? Gratitude, I suppose, said William. He wanted this conversation to stop right now. It was heading out over thin ice. And how's that calculated? Well, it isn't as such. Doesn't that cause problems? Sometimes. Ah, well, we know about gratitude too. But our way means the couple start their new lives in a state of Gudaraka. Free, unencumbered, new dwarfs. Then their parents might well give them a huge wedding present, much bigger than the dowry. But it is between dwarf and dwarf, out of love and respect, not between debtor and creditor. Though I have to say, these human words are not really the best way of describing it. It works for us. It's worked for 1,000 years. I suppose to a human it sounds a bit chilly, said William. Goodmountain gave him another studied look. You mean by comparison to the warm and wonderful ways humans conduct their affairs? He said. You don't have to answer that one. Anyway, me and Bodney want to open up a mine together, and we're expensive dwarfs. We know how to work lead, so we thought a year or two of this would see us right. You're getting married? We want to, said Goodmountain. Oh, well, congratulations, said William. He knew enough not to comment on the fact that both dwarfs looked like small barbarian warriors with long beards. All traditional dwarfs look like that. Most dwarfs were still referred to as he as well, even when they were getting married. It was generally assumed that somewhere under all that chainmail, one of them was female, and that both of them knew which one this was. But the whole subject of sex was one that traditionally minded dwarfs did not discuss, perhaps out of modesty, possibly because it didn't interest them very much, and certainly because they took the view that what two dwarfs decided to do together was entirely their own business. Goodmountain grinned. Don't worry too much about your father, lad. People change. My grandmother used to think humans were sort of hairless bears. She doesn't anymore. What changed her mind? I reckon it was the dying that did it. Goodmountain got up and patted William on the shoulder. Come on, let's get the paper finished. We'll start the run when the lads wake up. Breakfast was cooking when William got back, and Mrs. Arcanum was waiting. Her mouth was set in the firm line of someone hot on the trail of unrespectable behaviour. I shall require an explanation of last night's affair, she said, confronting him in the hallway. And a week's notice, if you please. William was too exhausted to lie. I wanted to see how much $70,000 weighed, he said. Muscles moved in various areas of the landlady's face. She knew William's background, being the kind of woman who finds out about that kind of thing very quickly, and the twitching was a sign of some internal struggle based around the definite fact that $70,000 was a respectable sum. I may perhaps have been a little hasty, she ventured. Did you find how much the money weighed? Yes, thank you. Would you like to keep the scales for a few days in case you want to weigh any more? I think I've finished weighing, Mrs. Arcanum, but thank you all the same. Breakfast has already begun, Mr. De Word, but, well, perhaps I can make allowances this time. He was given a second boiled egg, too. This was a rare sign of favour. The latest news was already the subject of deep discussion. I'm frankly amazed, said Mr. Cartwright. It beats me how they find this stuff out. It certainly makes you wonder what's going on that we aren't told, said Mr. Windling. William listened for a while until he couldn't wait any longer. Something interesting in the paper? He asked innocently. A woman in Kickleberry Street says her husband has been kidnapped by elves, said Mr. Mackelduff, holding up the Inquirer. The heading was very clear on the subject. Elves stole my husband. That's made up, said William. Can't be, said Mackelduff. There's the lady's name and address right here. They wouldn't put that in the paper if they were telling lies, would they? William looked at the name and address. I know this lady, he said. There you are, then. She was the one last month who said her husband had been carried off by a big silver dish that came out of the sky, said William, who had a good memory for this sort of thing. He'd nearly put it in his newsletter as an on a lighter note, but had thought better of it. And you, Mr. Prone, said everyone knew her husband had carried himself off with a lady called Flo, who used to work as a waitress in Harger's House of Ribs. Mrs. Arcanum gave William a sharp look, which said that the whole subject of nocturnal kitchenware theft could be reopened at any time, extra egg or no. I am not partial to that kind of talk at the table, she said coldly. Well, then it's obvious, said Mr. Cartwright. He must have come back. From the silver dish or from Flo, said William. Missed at the word. I was only asking, said William. Ah, I see they're revealing the name of the man who broke into the jeweller's the other day. Shame it's done it, Duncan, poor chap. A notorious criminal by the sound of it, said Mr. Windling. It's shocking that the watch won't arrest him. Especially since he calls on them every day, said William. Whatever for? A hot meal and a bed for the night, said William. Dunnit Duncan confesses to everything, you see. Original sin, murders, minor thefts, everything. When he's desperate, he tries to turn himself in for the reward. And they ought to do something about him, said Mrs. Arcanum. I believe they generally give him a mug of tea, said William. He paused and then ventured. Is there anything in the other paper? Oh, they're still trying to say that Vetinari didn't do it, said Mr. Mackelduff. And the King of Lanka says women of Lanka don't give birth to snakes. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Said Mrs. Arcanum. Vetinari must have done something, said Mr. Windling. Otherwise, why would he be helping the watch with their inquiries? That's not the action of an innocent man, in my humble opinion. The best way to describe Mr. Windling would be like this. You're at a meeting. You'd like to be away early, so would everyone else. There really isn't very much to discuss anyway. And just as everyone can see any other business coming over the horizon and is already putting their papers neatly together, a voice says, if I can raise a minor matter, Mr. Chairman, and with a horrible wooden feeling in your stomach, you know now that the evening will go on for twice as long, with much referring back to the minutes of earlier meetings. The man who has just said that, and is now sitting there with a smug smile of dedication to the committee process, is as near Mr. Windling as makes no difference. And something that distinguishes the Mr. Windlings of the universe is the term, in my humble opinion, which they think adds weight to their statements rather than indicating in reality, these are the mean little views of someone with the social grace of duckweed. I believe there's plenty of evidence that throws doubt on his guilt, said William. Really, said Mr. Windling, making the word suggest that William's opinion was considerably more humble than his. Anyway, I understand the guild leaders are meeting today. He sniffed. It's time for a change. Frankly, we could do with a ruler who is a little more responsive to the views of ordinary people. William glanced at Mr. Longshaft the dwarf, who was peacefully cutting some toast into soldiers. Perhaps he hadn't noticed. Perhaps there was nothing to notice, and William was being oversensitive. But years of listening to Lord de Word's opinions had given him a certain ear. It told him when phrases like the views of ordinary people, innocent and worthy in themselves, were being used to mean that somebody should be whipped. How do you mean? He said. The city is getting too big, said Mr. Windling. In the old days, the gates were kept shut, not left open to all and sundry. and people could leave their doors unlocked. We didn't have anything worth stealing, said Mr. Cartwright. That's true. There's more money around, said Mr. Prone. It doesn't all stay here, though, said Mr. Windling. That was true at least. Sending money home was the major export activity of the city, and dwarfs were right at the front of it. William also knew that most of it came back again, because dwarfs bought from the best dwarf craftsmen, and mostly the best dwarf craftsmen worked in Ankh-Morpork these days, and they sent money back home. A tide of gold coins rolled back and forth and seldom had a chance to go cold, but it upset the Windlings of the city. Mr. Longshaft quietly picked up his boiled egg and inserted it into an egg cup. There's just too many people in the city, Mr. Windling repeated. I've nothing against outsiders, heaven knows, but Veterinary let it go too far. Everyone knows we need someone who is prepared to be a little more firm. There was a metallic noise. Mr. Longshaft, still staring fixedly at his egg, had reached down and drawn a smallish but still impressively axe-like axe from his bag. Watching the egg carefully, as if it was about to run away, he leaned slowly back, paused for a moment, then brought the blade round in an arc of silver. The top of the egg flew up with hardly a noise, turned over in midair several feet above the plate, and landed beside the egg cup. Mr. Longshaft nodded to himself, and then looked up at the frozen expressions. I'm sorry, he said. I wasn't listening. At which point, as Saccharissa would have put it, the meeting broke up. William purchased his own copy of the Inquirer on the way to Gleam Street and wondered, not for the first time, who was writing this stuff. They were better at it than he would be, that was certain. He'd wondered once about making up a few innocent paragraphs when not much was happening in the city, and found that it was a lot harder than it looked. Try as he might, he kept letting common sense and intelligence get the better of him. Besides, telling lies was wrong. He noted glumly that they'd used the talking dog story. Oh, and one he hadn't heard before. A strange figure had been seen swooping around the rooftops of Unseen University at night. Half man, half moth. Half invented and half made up, more likely. The curious thing was, if the breakfast table jury was anything to go by, that denying stories like this only proved that they were true. After all, no one would bother to deny something if it didn't exist, would they? He took a short cut through the stables in Creek Alley. Like Gleam Street, Creek Alley was there to mark the back of places. This part of the city had no real existence, other than as a place you passed through to somewhere more interesting. The dull street was made up of high-windowed warehouses and broken-down sheds and, significantly, Hobson's livery stable. It was huge, especially since Hobson had realised that you could go multi-story. Willie Hobson was another businessman in the mould of the King of the Golden River. He'd found a niche, occupied it, and forced it open so wide that lots of money dropped in. Many people in the city occasionally needed a horse, and hardly anyone had a place to park one. You needed a stable, you needed a groom, you needed a hayloft. But to hire a horse from Willie, you just needed a few dollars. Lots of people kept their own horses there too. People came and went all the time. The bandy-legged, goblin-like little men who ran the place never bothered to stop anyone unless they appeared to have hidden a horse about their person. William looked round when a voice out of the gloom of the loose boxes said, "Excuse me, friend." He peered into the shadows. A few horses were watching him. In the distance, around him, other horses were being moved. People were shouting. There was the general bustle of the stables. But the voice had come out of a little pool of ominous silence. "I've still got 2 months to go on my last receipt," he said to the darkness. "And may I say that the free canteen of cutlery seemed to be made of an alloy of lead and horse manure?" "I'm not a thief, friend," said the shadows. "Who's there? Do you know what's good for you?" Yes. Healthy exercise, regular meals, a good night's sleep." William stared at the long lines of loose boxes. "I think what you meant to ask was, do I know what's bad for me? In the general context of blunt instruments and sharp edges, yes?" "Broadly, yes. No, don't move, mister. You stand where I can see you and no harm will come to you." William analysed this. "Yes, but if I stand where you can't see me, I don't see how any harm could come to me there, either." Something sighed. "Look, meet me halfway here. No, don't move. But you just said to... Just stand still and shut up and listen, will you?" "All right." "I am hearing where there's a certain dog that people are looking for," said the mystery voice. "Ah, yes. The watch want him. Yes. And?" William thought he could just make out a slightly darker shape. More importantly, he could smell a smell, even above the general background odour of the horses. "Ron?" he said. Do I sound like Ron? Said the voice. Not exactly. So, who am I talking to? You can call me Deep Bone. Deep Bone? Anything wrong with that? I suppose not. What can I do for you, Mr. Bone? Just supposing someone knew where the doggy was, but didn't want to get involved with the watch, said the voice of Deep Bone. Why not? Let's just say the watch can be trouble to a certain kind of person, eh? That's one reason. All right. And let's just say there's people around who'd much prefer the little doggy didn't tell what he knew, shall we? The watch might not take enough care. They're very uncaring about dogs, the watch. Are they? Oh, yes. The watch think a dog has no human rights at all. That's another reason. Is there a third reason? Yeah. I read in the paper where there's a reward. Yes. Only it got printed wrong. 'Cause it said $25 instead of $100, see? Oh, I see. But $100 is a lot of money for a dog, Mr. Bone. Not for this dog, if you know what I mean, said the shadows. This dog's got a story to tell. Oh, yes. It's the famous talking dog of Ankh-Morpork, is it? Deep Bone growled. Dogs can't talk, everyone knows that. But there's them as can understand dog language, if you catch my drift. Werewolves, you mean? Could be people of that type of kidney, yes. But the only werewolf I know is in the watch, said William. So you're just telling me to pay you $100 so that I could hand Waffles over to the watch? That'd be a feather in your cap with old Vimes, wouldn't it? Said Deep Bone. But you said you didn't trust the watch, Mr. Bone. I do listen to what people say, you know. Deep Bone went quiet for a while. Then, all right, the dog and an interpreter, $150. And the story this dog could tell deals with events in the palace a few mornings ago? Could be, could be, could very well be. Could be exactly the kind of thing I'm referring to. I want to see who I'm talking to, said William. Can't do that. Oh, well, said William. That's reassuring. I'll just go and get $150, shall I, and bring it back to this place and hand it over to you just like that. Good idea. Not a chance. Oh, so you don't trust me, eh? Said Deep Bone. That's right. Supposing I was to tell you a little piece of free news information for gratis and nothing. A lick of the lolly, a little taste style of thing. Go on. It wasn't Veterinari who stabbed the other man, it was another man. William wrote this down and then looked at it. Exactly how helpful is this? He said. That's a bit of good news, that is. Hardly anyone knows it. There's not a lot to know. Isn't there a description? He's got a dog bite on his ankle, said Deep Bone. That'll make him easy to find in the street, won't it? What are you expecting me to do? Try a little surreptitious trouser lifting? Deep Bone sounded hurt. That's kosher news, that is. It'd worry certain people if you put that in your paper. Yes, they'd worry that I'd gone mad. You've got to tell me something better than that. Can you give me a description? Deep Bone went silent for a while, and when the voice spoke again, it sounded uncertain. You mean, what he looked like? It said. Well, yes. Ah, well, it don't work like that with dogs, see? What your average dog does, basically, is look up. People are mostly just a wall with a pair of nostril holes at the top, is my point. Not a lot of help, then, said William. Sorry we can't do business. What he smells like now, that's something else, said the voice of Deep Bone hurriedly. All right, tell me what he smells like. Do I see a pile of cash in front of me? I don't think so. Well, Mr. Bone, I'm not even going to think about getting that kind of money together until I've got some proof that you really know something. All right, said the voice from the shadows after a while. You know there's a committee to unselect a patrician? Now that's news. What's new about that? People have plotted to get rid of him for years. There was another pause. You know, said Deep Bone, it'd save a lot of trouble if you just gave me the money and I told you everything. So far you haven't told me anything. Tell me everything, then I'll pay you, if it's the truth. Oh yeah, pull one of the others, it's got bells on. Then it looks like we can't do business, said William, putting his notebook away. Wait, this'll do. You ask Vimes what Veterinari did just before the attack. Why, what did he do? See if you can find out. That's not a lot to go on. There was no reply. William thought he heard a shuffling noise. Hello? He waited a moment, and then very carefully stepped forward. In the gloom, a few horses turned to look at him. Of an invisible informant, there was no sign. A lot of thoughts jostled for space in his mind as he headed out into the daylight. But surprisingly enough, it was a small and theoretically unimportant one that kept oozing into centre stage. What kind of expression was pull one of the others it's got bells on? Now, pull the other one it's got bells on he'd heard of. It stemmed from the days of a crueler-than-usual ruler in Ankh-Morpork who had had any Morris dancers ritually tortured. But one of the others? There was a sense in that. Then it struck him. Deep Bone must be a foreigner. It made sense. It was like the way Otto spoke perfectly good Morporkian, but hadn't got the hang of colloquialisms. He made a note of this. He smelled the smoke at the same time as he heard the pottery clatter of golem feet. 4 of the clay people thudded past him carrying a long ladder. Without thinking, he fell in behind, automatically turning to a new page in his notebook. Fire was always the terror in those parts of the city where wood and thatch predominated. That was why everyone had been so dead set against any form of fire brigade, reasoning, with impeccable Ankh-Morpork logic, that any bunch of men who were paid to put out fires would naturally see to it that there was a plentiful supply of fires to put out. Golems were different. They were patient, hard-working, intensely logical, virtually indestructible, and they volunteered. Everyone knew golems couldn't harm people. There was some mystery about how the golem fire brigade had got formed. Some said the idea had come from the Watch, but the generally held theory was that golems simply would not allow people and property to be destroyed. With eerie discipline and no apparent communication, they would converge on a fire from all sides, rescue any trapped people, secure and carefully pile up all portable property, form a bucket chain along which the buckets moved at a blur, trample every last ember, and then hurry back to their abandoned tasks. These 4 were hurrying to a blazing treacle mine road. Tongues of fire curled out of first-floor rooms. "Are you from the paper?" said a man in the crowd. "Yes," said William. "Well, I reckon this is another case of mysterious spontaneous combustion, just like you reported yesterday." And he craned his neck to see if William was writing this down. William groaned. Saccharissa had reported a fire in Lobbin Clout, in which one poor soul had died, and had left it at that. But the Inquirer had called it a mystery fire. "I'm not sure that one was very mysterious," he said. "Old Mr. Hardy decided to light a cigar and forgot he was bathing his feet in turpentine. Apparently someone had told him this was a cure for athlete's foot, and, well, in a way, they'd been right." "That's what they say," said the man, tapping his nose. "But there's a lot we don't get told." "That's true," said William. "I heard only the other day that giant rocks hundreds of miles across crash into the country every week, but a patrician hushes it up." "There you are, then," said the man. "It's amazing the way they treat us as if we're stupid." "Yes, it's a puzzle to me, too," said William. Gang Vic, please." Otto pushed through the onlookers, struggling under the weight of a device the size and general shape of an accordion. He elbowed his way to the front of the crowd, balanced the device on its tripod, and aimed it at a golem who was climbing out of a smoking window, holding a small child. "All right, boys, this is the big one," he said, and raised the flash cage. 1, 2, 3. The vampire became a cloud of gently settling dust. For a moment, something hovered in the air. It looked like a small jar on a necklace made of string, then it fell and smashed on the cobbles. The dust mushroomed up, took on a shape, and Otto stood blinking and running his hands over himself to check that he was all there. He caught sight of William and gave him the kind of big, broad smile that only a vampire can give. "Mr. William, it worked, your idea." Which one?" said William. A thin plume of yellow smoke was creeping out from under the lid of the big iconograph. "You said, carry a little drop of emergency B-word," said Otto. "So, I thought, if it is in a little bottle around my neck, then if I crumble to dust, hoopla, it will crash and smash, and here I am." He lifted the lid of the iconograph and waved the smoke away. There was a sound of very small coughing from within. "And if I am not mistaken, we have a successfully etched picture. All of which only goes to show what we can achieve when our brains are not clouded by thoughts of open windows and bare necks, which never cross my mind at all these days, because I am completely B-total." Otto had made changes to his clothing. Away had gone the traditional black evening dress preferred by his species, to be replaced by an armless vest containing more pockets than William had ever seen on one garment. Many of them were stuffed with packets of imp food, extra paint, mysterious tools, and other essentials of the iconographer's art. In deference to tradition, though, Otto had made it black with a red silk lining and had added tails.
End of CD 6. CD 7.
On making gentle inquiries of a family watching disconsolately as the smoke from the fire was turned to steam, William ascertained that the blaze had been mysteriously caused by mysterious spontaneous combustion in an overflowing mysterious chip pan full of boiling fat. William left them picking through the blackened remains of their home. And it's just a story, he said, putting away the notebook. It does make me feel a bit of a vampire. Oh, sorry. It is okay, said Otto. I understand. And I should like to thank you for giving me this job. It means a lot to me, especially since I can see how nervous you are, which is understandable, of course. I'm not nervous. I'm very much at home with other species, said William hotly. Otto's expression was amicable, but it was also as penetrative as the smile of a vampire can be. Yes, I notice how careful you are to be friendly with the dwarfs, and you are kind to me also. It is a big effort which is very commendable. William opened his mouth to protest and gave up. All right, look, it's the way I was brought up, all right? My father was definitely very in favour of humanity. Well, not humanity in the sense of... I mean, it was more that he was against... Yes, I understand. And that's all there is to it, okay. We can all decide who we're going to be. Yes, sure. And if you want any advice about women, you only have to ask. Why should I want advice about women? Oh, no reason at all, said Otto innocently. Anyway, you're a vampire. What advice could a vampire give me about women? Oh, my word. Wake up and smell the garlic. All the stories I could tell you. Otto paused. But I won't, because I don't do that sort of thing anymore, now that I have seen the daylight. He nudged William, who was red with embarrassment. Let us just say they don't always scream. That's a bit tasteless, isn't it? Oh, that was in the bad old days, said Otto hurriedly. Now I like nothing better than a nice mug of cocoa and a good sing-song around the harmonium, I assure you. Oh yes, my word. Getting into the office to write up the story turned out to be a problem. In fact, so was getting into Gleam Street. Otto caught William up as he stood and stared. Well, I suppose we asked for it, he shouted. $25 is a lot of money. What? Shouted William. I said $25 is a lot of money, William. What? Several people pushed past them. They were carrying dogs. Everyone in Gleam Street was carrying a dog, or leading a dog, or being dragged by a dog, or being savaged, despite the owner's best efforts, by a dog belonging to someone else. The barking had already gone beyond mere sounds, and was now some kind of perceptible force, hitting the eardrums like a hurricane made of scrap iron. William pulled the vampire into a doorway, where the din was merely unbearable. Can't you do something? He screamed. Otherwise we'll never get through. Like what? Well, you know, all that children of the night business. Oh, that, said Otto. He looked glum. That's really very stereotypical, you know. Why don't you ask me to turn into a bat value about it? I told you I don't do that stuff no more. Have you got a better idea? A few feet away, a Rottweiler was doing its best to eat a spaniel. Oh, very well. Otto waved his hands vaguely. The barking ceased instantly, and then every dog sat on its haunches and howled. Not a huge improvement, but at least they're not fighting, said William, hurrying forward. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Stake me as you pass, said Otto. I shall have a very embarrassing 5 minutes explaining this at the next meeting, you understand? I know it's not the sucking item, but I mean, one should care about the look of the thing. They climbed over a rotting fence and entered the shed via the back door. People and dogs were squeezing in through the other door and were only held at bay by a barricade of desks, and also by Saccharissa, who was looking harassed as she faced a sea of faces and muzzles. William could just make out her voice above the din. No, that's a poodle. It doesn't look a bit like the dog we're after. No, that's not it. How do I know? Because it's a cat. All right, then why is it washing itself? No, I'm sorry, dogs don't do that. No, madam, that's a bulldog. No, that's not it. No, sir, I know that's not it. Because it's a parrot, that's why. You've taught it to bark and you've painted dog on the side of it, but it's still a parrot. Saccharissa pushed her hair out of her eyes and caught sight of William. Well, now, who's been a clever boy, she said. Who's a clever boy? Said the dog. How many more out there? Hundreds, I'm afraid. Well, I've just had the most unpleasant half hour of... That's a chicken. It's a chicken, you stupid woman. It's just laid an egg. Of my life, and I would like to thank you very much. You'll never guess what happened. No, that's a Schnauzwitzer. And you know what, William? What? Said William. Some complete muffin offered a reward. In Ankh-Morpork, Can you believe that? They were queuing 3 deep when I got here. I mean, what kind of idiot would do a thing like that? I mean, one man had a cow. A cow! I had a huge argument about animal physiology before Rocky hit him over the head. The poor troll's out there now, trying to keep order. There's ferrets out there. Look, I'm sorry. I wonder if we can be of any assistance? They turned. The speaker was a priest, dressed in the black, unadorned and unflattering habit of the Omnians. He had a flat, broad-brimmed hat, the Omnian's turtle symbol around his neck, and an expression of almost terminal benevolence. I am brother upon which the angels dance pin, said the priest, stepping aside to reveal a mountain in black. And this is Sister Jennifer, who is under a vow of silence. They stared up at the apparition of Sister Jennifer, while Brother Pin went on, that means she does not talk at all in any circumstances. Oh dear, said Saccharissa weakly. One of Sister Jennifer's eyes was revolving in a face that was like a brick wall. Yes, and we happened to be in Ankh-Morpork as part of the Bishop Horn Ministry to Animals, and heard that you were looking for a little doggy who is in trouble, said Brother Pin. I can see you are, a little overwhelmed, and perhaps we can help. It would be our duty. The dog's a little terrier, said Saccharissa, but you'd be amazed at what people are bringing in. Dear me, said Brother Pin. But Sister Jennifer is very good at this sort of thing. Sister Jennifer strode to the front desk. A man hopefully held up what was clearly a badger. He's been a bit ill. Sister Jennifer brought her fist down on the man's head. William winced. Sister Jennifer's order believes in tough love, said Brother Pin. A little correction at the right time can prevent a lost soul taking the wrong path. Which order is this she belongs to, please? Said Otto, as the lost soul carrying his badger staggered out, his legs trying to take several paths at once. Brother Pin gave him a damp smile. The little flowers of perpetual annoyance, he said. Really? I had not heard of this one. Very outreaching. Well, I must go and see if the imps have done their job properly. Certainly the crowd was thinning rapidly under the stress of seeing the advancing Sister Jennifer, especially that segment of it that had brought dogs which purred or ate sunflower seeds. Many of those who had brought an actual living dog were looking nervous as well. A sense of unease crept over William. He knew that some sections of the Omnian Church still believed that the way to send a soul to heaven was to give the body hell, and Sister Jennifer couldn't be blamed for her looks, or even the size of her hands. And even if the backs of said hands were rather hairy, well, that was the sort of thing that happened out there in rural districts. What exactly is she doing? He said. There were yelps and shouts in the queue as dogs were grabbed, glared at, and thrust back with more than minimum force. As I said, we're trying to find the little dog, said Brother Pin. It may need ministering to. But that wire-haired terrier there looks pretty much like the picture, said Saccharissa, and she's just ignored it. Sister Jennifer is very sensitive in these matters, said Brother Pin. Oh well, this is not getting the next edition filled, said Saccharissa, heading back to her desk. I expect it would help if we could print in colour, said William, when he was left alone with Brother Pin. Probably, said the Reverend Brother. It was a kind of greyish brown. William knew then that he was dead. It was only a matter of time. You know what colour you're looking for, he said quietly. You just get on with sorting out the words, writer boy, said Brother Pin, for his ears only. He opened the jacket of his frock coat, just enough for William to see the range of cutlery holstered there, and closed it again. This isn't anything to do with you, okay? Shout out, and someone gets killed. Try to be a hero, and someone gets killed. Make any kind of sudden move, and someone gets killed. In fact, we might as well kill someone anyway and save some time. Hey? You know that stuff about the pen being mightier than the sword? Yes, said William hoarsely. Want to try? No. William caught sight of Goodmountain, who was staring at him. What's that dwarf doing? Said Brother Pin. He's setting type, sir, said William. It was always wise to be polite to edged weapons. Tell him to get on with it, said Pin. If you could just get on with it, Mr. Goodmountain, said William, raising his voice over the growls and yelps. Everything is fine. Goodmountain nodded and turned his back. He held up one hand theatrically and then started to assemble the pipe. William watched. It was better than semaphore as the hand dipped from box to box. H-E-S space A space F-A-W-E W. W is in the box next to K. Yes, indeed, said William. Pin glanced at him. Yes, indeed, what? It was just nerves, said William. I'm always nervous in the presence of swords. Pin glanced at the dwarfs. They all had their backs to him. Goodmountain's hand moved again, flicking letter after letter from its nest. A-R-M-E-D, question mark, space. C-O-F-F, space. 4, space. Y-E-S. Something wrong with your throat? Said Mr. Pin, after William coughed. Just nerves again, sir. O-K, space. W-I-L-L, space. G-E-T, space. O-T-T-O. Oh no, William muttered. Where's that dwarf going? Said Pin, his hand reaching into his coat. Just to the cellar, sir, to fetch some ink. Why? Looks like you've got lots of ink up here already. The white ink, sir, for the spaces and the middle of the O's. William leaned towards Mr. Pin and shuddered when the hand reached inside the jacket again. Look, the dwarfs are all armed too, with axes, and they get excited very easily. I'm the only person anywhere near you who hasn't got a weapon. Please? I don't want to die just yet. Just do whatever you came to do and go. It was a pretty good impression of an abject coward, he thought, because it was casting for type. Pin glanced away. How are we doing, Sister Jennifer? He said. Sister Jennifer held up a struggling sack. Got all the ink terriers, he said. Brother Pin shook his head sharply. Got all the ink terriers, fluted Sister Jennifer in a much higher register. And there's ink watchman at the end of the street. Out of the corner of his eye, William saw Saccharissa sit bolt upright. Death was certainly somewhere on the agenda now. Otto was climbing unconcernedly up the cellar steps, one of his iconograph boxes swinging from his shoulder. He nodded at William. Behind him, Saccharissa was pushing her chair back. Back in front of his case of type, Goodmountain was feverishly setting H-I-D-E space Y-O-U-R space E-Y-E-S. Mr. Pin turned to William. What do you mean, white ink for the spaces? Saccharissa was looking angry and determined, like Mrs. Arcanum after an uncalled-for remark. The vampire raised his box. William saw the hod above it, crammed with Ubervaltian land eels. Mr. Pin thrust back his coat. William leapt towards the advancing girl, rising through the air like a frog through treacle. Dwarfs started to jump over the low barrier to the pinch room with axes in their hands, and... Bull, said Otto. Time stopped. William felt the universe fold away, the little globe of walls and ceilings peeling back like the skin of an orange, leaving a chilly, rushing darkness filled with needles of ice. There were voices, cut off, random syllables of sound, and again the feeling that he'd felt before, that his body was as thin and insubstantial as a shadow. Then he landed on top of Saccharissa, threw his arms around her, and rolled them both behind the welcome barrier of the desks. Dogs howled, people swore, dwarfs yelled, furniture smashed. William lay still until the thunder died away. It was replaced by groans and swearing. Swearing was a positive indication. It was dwarfish swearing, and it meant that the swearer was not only alive, but angry too. He raised his head carefully. The far door was open. There was no queue, no dogs. There was the sound of running feet and furious barking out in the street. The back door was swinging on its hinges. William was aware of the pneumatic warmth of Saccharissa in his arms. This was an experience of the sort which, in a life devoted to arranging words in a pleasing order, he had not dreamed would, well, obviously dreamed, his inner editor corrected him, better make that expected, would have come his way. I'm dreadfully sorry, he said. That was technically a white lie, the editor said, like thanking your aunt for the lovely handkerchiefs. It's okay, it's okay. He drew away carefully and got unsteadily to his feet. The dwarfs were also staggering upright. One or two of them were being noisily sick. The body of Otto Shriek was crumpled on the floor. The departing Brother Pin had got one expert cut in, at neck height, before leaving. Oh, my gods, said William. What a dreadful thing to happen. What, having your head cut off? Said Bodney, who'd never liked the vampire. Yes, I expect you could say that. We ought to do something for him. Really? Yes. I'd have been killed for sure if he hadn't used those eels. Excuse me. Excuse me, please. The sing-song voice was coming from under the printer's bench. Goodmountain knelt down. Oh, no, he said. What is it? Said William. It's, well, it's Otto. Excuse me, please. Could someone get me out of here? Goodmountain, grimacing, pushed his hand into the darkness while the voice continued. Oh, crikey, there is a dead rat under here. Someone must have dropped their lunch. How sordid. Not the ear, please. Not the ear. By the hair, please. The hand came out, holding Otto's head by the hair as he requested. The eyes swiveled. Everyone all right? Said the vampire. That was a close shave, yes? Are you all right, Otto? Said William, realizing that this was a winning entrant in the really stupid things to say contest. What? Oh, yes, I think so. Mustn't grumble. Pretty good, really. It's just that I seem to have had my head cut off, which you could say is a bit of a drawback. That's not Otto, said Saccharissa. She was shaking. Of course it is, said William. I mean, who else could it... Otto's taller than that, said Saccharissa, and burst out laughing. The dwarfs started to laugh too, because at that moment they would laugh at anything. Otto didn't join in very enthusiastically. Oh yes, ho, 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 he said. The famous Ankh-Morpork sense of humor. What a funny joke. Talk about laugh. Do not mind me. Saccharissa was gasping for breath. William grabbed her as gently as he could, because this was the kind of laughter you died of. And now she was crying great racking sobs that bubbled up through the laughs. I wish I was dead, she sobbed. You should try it sometime, said Otto. Mr. Goodmountain, take me to my body, please. It is around here somewhere. Do you have to sew? Goodmountain tried. No, we heal easily, said Otto. Ah, there it is. If you could just put me down by me, please, and turn around. This is a bit, embarrassing. Like the making of the water. Still wincing in the after effects of the dark light, the dwarfs obeyed. After a moment they heard, Okay, you can look now. Otto, all in one piece, was sitting up and dabbing at his neck with a handkerchief. Got to be a stake in the heart as well, he said as they stared. So, what was all that about, please? The dwarf said to make a distraction. We didn't know you used dark light, snapped Goodmountain. Excuse me? All I had ready was the land eels, and you said it looked urgent. What did you expect me to do? I'm reformed. That's bad luck, that stuff, said a dwarf William had come to know as Dozy. Oh yes, you think? Well, I'm the one who is going to have his collar laundered, snapped Otto. William did his best to comfort Saccharissa, who was still trembling. Who were they? She said. I'm not sure, but they certainly wanted Lord Vetinari's dog. I'm sure that she wasn't a proper virgin, you know. Sister Jennifer certainly looked very odd, was the most William was going to concede. Saccharissa snorted. Oh no, I was taught by worse than her at school, she said. Sister Credenza could bite through a door. No, it was the language. I'm sure ing is a bad word. She certainly used it like one. I mean, you could tell it was a bad word. And that priest, he had a knife. Behind them, Otto was in trouble. You use it to take pictures, said Goodmountain. Why, yes. Several of the dwarfs slapped their thighs, half turned away, and did the usual little pantomime that people do to indicate that they just can't believe someone else could be so damn stupid. You know it is dangerous, said Goodmountain. Mere superstition, said Otto. All that possibly happens is that a subject's own morphic signature aligns the resons, or thing particles, in a phase space according to the temporal relevance theory, creating the effect of multiple directionless windows which intersect with the illusion of the present and create metaphoric images according to the dictates of quasi-historical extrapolation. You see? Nothing mysterious about it at all. It certainly frightened off those people, said William. It was the axes that did that, said Goodmountain firmly. No, it was the feeling that the top of your head has been opened and icicles have been pounded into your brain, said William. Goodmountain blinked. Yeah, okay, that's true, he said, mopping his forehead. You've got away with words right enough. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Goodmountain grabbed his axe. William groaned. It was Vimes. Worse, he was smiling in a humourless, predatory way. Ah, Mr. De Word, he said, stepping inside. There are several thousand dogs stampeding through the city at the moment. This is an interesting fact, isn't it? He leaned against the wall and produced a cigar. Well, I say dogs, he said, striking a match on Goodmountain's helmet. Mostly dogs, perhaps I should say. Some cats. More cats now, in fact, because there's nothing like a tidal wave of dogs fighting and biting and howling to sort of, how can I put it, give a city a certain busyness, especially underfoot. Because, did I mention it, they're very nervous dogs too. Oh, and did I mention cattle? He went on conversationally. You know how it is, market day and so on, people are driving the cows and, my goodness, round the corner comes a wall of wailing dogs. Oh, and I forgot about the sheep. And the chickens. Although I imagine there's not much left of the chickens now. He stared at William. Anything you feel you want to tell me, he said. We had a bit of a problem. Never. Really? Do tell. The dogs took fright when Mr. Shriek took a picture of them, said William. This was absolutely true. Dark light was frightening enough, even if you knew what was happening. Vimes glared at Otto, who looked miserably at his feet. Well, now, said Vimes. Shall I tell you something? They're electing a new patrician today. Who? Said William. I don't know, said Vimes. Saccharissa blew her nose and said, It'll be Mr. Scrope of the shoemakers and leatherworkers. Vimes gave William a suspicious look. How do you know that? He said. Everyone knows, said Saccharissa. That's what the young man in the bakery said this morning. Oh, where would we be without rumour, said Vimes. So this is not a day, Mr. De Word, for things to go wrong. My men are talking to some of the people who brought dogs along. Not many of them, I have to admit. Most of them don't want to talk to the watch. Can't think why, we're very good listeners. Now, is there anything you want to tell me? Vimes looked around the room and back to William. Everyone's staring at you, I notice. The Times does not need any help from the watch, said William. Helping wasn't what I had in mind. We haven't done anything wrong. I'll decide that. Really? That's an interesting point of view. Vimes glanced down. William had taken his notebook out of his pocket. Oh, he said, I see. He reached down to his own belt and pulled out a blunt, dark length of wood. You know what this is? He said. It's a truncheon, said William. A big stick. Always the last resort, eh? Said Vimes evenly. Rosewood and Plamados silver. A lovely piece of work. And it says on this little plate here that I'm supposed to keep the peace. And you, Mr. De Word, don't look like part of that right now. They locked gazes. What was the odd thing Lord Vetinari did just before the accident? Said William, so quietly that probably only Vimes heard it. Vimes didn't even blink, but after a moment he laid the truncheon down on the desk with a click that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. Now you put your notebook down, lad, he suggested in a quiet voice. That way, it's just me and you. No clash of cymbals. This time William could see where the path of wisdom lay. He put down the book. Right, said Vimes. And now you and me are going to go over to the corner there while your friends tidy up. Amazing, isn't it? How much furniture can get broken just by taking a picture? He went and sat down on an upturned washtub. William made do with a rocking horse. All right, Mr. De Word, we'll do this your way, said Vimes.
Oh, Locked and Goaded. I wonder who that is. Resupply, yes, we're resupplying. I ran out of cap. I'm pretty low on potions, and my armor imbuement, at least one part of it, is gone. Will also be a good opportunity to empty my dust and refill my amulets. Okay, good. What else? What else? Oh. Oh, and re-imbue my armor. So I'll need what else? Andrake and sulfur, which I probably have. Yes. Okay, perfect. I did deposit all my gold, right? Yes. Oh, thanks for the follow. Yeah, I'm gonna get it pretty soon. Ow. Damn it, my coffee is ice cold. Actually, I'll do something else here. I need to add... Wait, what the hell's going on? There we go. I have to add Wolfie to my seal hotkey.
didn't know I had a way. You're not going to tell me what you know, are
That was
you?
scary.
I'm not sure.
Switching
I know,
windows in the
but
middle of
I
pulling
think
dragons.
Lord Vetinari did something remarkable not long before the crime. Vimes pulled out his own notebook and thumbed through it. He entered the palace by the stables sometime before 7 o'clock and dismissed the guard, he said. He'd been out all night. Vimes shrugged. His lordship comes and goes. The guards don't ask him where and why. Have they been talking to you? William was ready for the question. He just didn't have an answer. But the palace guard, insofar as he'd met them, weren't men chosen for imagination or flair, but for a kind of obstructive loyalty. They didn't sound like a potential deep bone. I don't think so, he said. Oh, you don't think so? Hold on. Deep Bone claimed to know the dog Waffles, and a dog ought to know if his master was acting oddly. Dogs liked routine. I think it's very unusual for his lordship to be outside the palace at that time, said William carefully. Not part of the routine. Nor is stabbing your clerk and trying to run
Damn
away
it.
with a very heavy sack of cash, said Vimes. Yeah, we noticed that too. We're not stupid, we only look stupid. Oh, and the guard said he smelt spirits on his lordship's breath. Does he drink? Not so as you'd notice. He's got a drinks cabinet in his office. Vimes smiled. You noticed that? He likes other people to drink. But all that might mean was that he was plucking up...
Yeah, good
courage
enough.
William began and stopped. No, that's not Vetinari. He's not that sort. No, he isn't, said Vimes. He sat back. Perhaps you'd better think again, Mr. De Word. Maybe you can find someone to help you think better. Something in his manner suggested that the informal part of the discussion was well and truly over. Do you know much about Mr. Scrope? Said William. Tuttle Scrope, son of old Tuskin Scrope, president of the Guild of Cobblers and Leatherworkers for the past 7 years, said Vimes. Family man, old established shop in Wixon's Alley. That's all? Mr. De Word, that's all the watch knows about Mr. Scrope. You understand? You wouldn't want to know about some of the people we know a lot about. Ah, William's brow wrinkled. But there's not a shoe shop in Wixon's Alley. I never mentioned shoes. In fact, the only shop that is even remotely connected with leather is...
that was close.
That's the one, said Vimes. But that sells. Comes under the heading of leatherwork, said Vimes, picking up his truncheon. Well, yes, and rubber work and feathers and whips and little jiggly things, said William, blushing, but never been in there myself, although I believe Corporal Nobbs gets their catalogue, said Vimes. I don't think there's a guild of makers of little jiggly things, though it's an interesting thought. Anyway, Mr. Scrope is all nice and legal, Mr. De Word. Nice old family atmosphere, I understand. Makes buying this and that and little jiggly things as pleasant as half a pound of humbugs, I don't doubt. And what rumour is telling me is that the first thing nice Mr. Scrope will do is pardon Lord Vetinari. What? Without a trial? Won't that be nice? Said Vimes, with horrible cheerfulness. A good start to his term of office, eh? Clean sheet, fresh start, no sense in raking up unpleasantness. Poor chap, overwork, bound to crack. Didn't get enough fresh air, and so on. So he can be put away in some nice quiet place, and we'll be able to stop worrying about this old wretched affair. A bit of a relief, eh? But you know he didn't, do I? Said Vimes. This is an official truncheon of office, Mr. De Word. If it was a club with a nail in it, this would be a different sort of city. I'm off now. You've been thinking, you tell me. Maybe you ought to think some more. William watched him go. Saccharissa had pulled herself together, perhaps because no one was trying to comfort her anymore. What are we going to do now? She said. I don't know. Get a paper out, I suppose. That's our job. But what happens if those men come back? I don't think they will. This place is being watched now. Saccharissa started to pick papers up off the floor. I suppose I'll feel better if I do something. That's the spirit. If you can give me a few paragraphs about that fire. Otto got a decent picture, said William. Didn't you, Otto? Oh, yes, that one is okay, but... The vampire was staring down at his iconograph. It was smashed. Oh, I'm so sorry, said William. I have others, Otto sighed. You know, I thought it would be easy in the big city, he said. I thought it would be civilized. They told me mobs didn't come after you with pitchforks in the big city like they do back in Shusha. I mean, I try. God knows I try. 3 months, 4 days, and 7 hours on the wagon. I give up the whole thing. Even the pale ladies with the velvet basques worn on the outside, and the fetching black lace dresses, and those tiny little, high-heeled boots. And that was a wrench, I don't mind telling you. He shook his head miserably and stared at his ruined shirt. And stuff all gets broken, and now my best shirt is covered with blood. Covered with red blood, rich, dark blood, the blood, covered with the blood. Quick, said Saccharissa, pushing past William. Mr. Goodmountain, you hold his arms. She waved at the dwarfs. I was ready for this. 2 of you hold his legs. Dozy, there's a huge bloodthirst in my desk drawer. Let me walk in sunshine, leaving not in vain, Otto crooned. Oh my God, his eyes are glowing red, said William. What shall we do? We could try cutting his head off again, said Bodney. That was a very poor joke, Bodney, Saccharissa snapped. Joke? I was smiling. Otto stood up, the cursing dwarfs hanging off his sparse frame. Through thunderstorm and dreadful night, we will carry on the fight. He's as strong as an ox, said Goodmountain. Hang on, maybe it would help if we joined in, said Saccharissa. She fumbled in her bag and produced a slim blue...
I apologize that I'm not reading chat much more frequently, but it's a bit
it's so sad. It's called
stressful here, and it kind of requires hyper-focus.
Sing-song, said Goodmountain as the struggling Otto lifted him off the ground. Just to give him moral support. Saccharissa dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. You can see he's trying to fight it, and he did lay down his life for us. Yes, but then he picked it up again. William bent down and took up something from the wreckage of Otto's iconograph.
Thank you, thank you.
The imp had escaped, but the picture that it had painted was just visible. Perhaps it would show... It wasn't a good one of the man who'd called himself Brother Pin. His face was just a white blob in the glare of the light that humans couldn't see. But the shadows behind him... He looked closer. Oh, my gods! The shadows behind him were alive. It was sleeting. Brother Pin and Sister Tulip slid and slithered through the freezing drops. Behind them, whistles were blowing in the murk. Come on! Pin yelled. These ink sacks are heavy! There were whistles blowing off to one side now, too. Mr. Pin wasn't used to this. Watchmen shouldn't be enthusiastic or organised. He'd been chased by watchmen before, when plans hadn't quite worked out. Their job was to give up at the second corner, out of breath. He felt quite angry about that. The watchmen here were doing it wrong. He was aware of an open space to one side of him, full of damp, swirling flakes. Below him there was a sluggish, sucking noise, like a very bad digestion. This is a bridge. Chuck them in the river, he commanded. I thought we wanted to find... Doesn't matter. Get rid of all of them, right now. End of problem. Sister Tulip grunted a reply and skidded to a halt at the parapet. The 2 whining, yapping sacks went straight on over. Did that sound like a ing splash to you? Said Sister Tulip, peering through the sleet. Who cares? Now run! Mr. Pin shivered as he sped on. He didn't know what had been done to him back there, but he'd felt like he'd walked over his own grave. He felt he had more than just watchmen after him. He speeded up. In reluctant but marvellous harmony, because no one could sing like a group of dwarfs, even if the song was May I Suck of Water Pure. In other circumstances, it would have been as likely as cows singing Let Me Be Covered in Rapturous Gravy. The dwarfs seemed to be calming Otto down. Besides, the horrible black emergency bloodthirst had finally been produced. For a vampire, this was the equivalent of a cardboard cigarette to a terminal nicotine addict, but it was at least something he could get his teeth into. When William finally tore his gaze away from the horror of the shadows, Saccharissa was mopping Otto's brow. Oh, once again, I am so ashamed. Where can I put my head? It's so... William held up the picture. Otto, what's this? In the shadows were mouths screaming. In the shadows were eyes wide. They didn't move while you watched them, but if you looked at the picture a second time, you got a feeling that they weren't quite in the same place. Otto shuddered. Oh, I used all the eels I had, he said. And? Oh, they're awful, breathed Saccharissa, looking away from the tortured shadows. I feel so wretched, said Otto. Obviously they were too strong.
There we go.
Tell us, Otto. Well, the iconograph does not lie. You have heard this, of course. Yes, well, under strong dark light, the picture really does not lie. Dark light reveals the truth, to the dark eyes of the mind. He paused and sighed. Once again, no ominous roll of thunder, what a waste. But at least you could look apprehensively at the shadows. All heads turned towards the shadows in the corner of the room and under the roof. They were simply shadows, haunted by nothing more than dust and spiders. But there's just dust and... Saccharissa began. Otto held up a hand. Dear lady, I have just told you. Philosophically, the truth can be what is metaphorically there. William stared at the picture again. I had hoped that I could use filters and so on to cut down on the unwanted effects, said Otto behind him. But alas, this gets worse and worse, said Saccharissa. It gives me the humorous vegetables. Good Mountain shook his head. This is unholy stuff, he said. No more meddling with it, understand? I didn't think dwarfs were religious, said William. We are not, said Good Mountain. But we know unholy when we see it. And I'm looking at it right now. I'm telling you, I don't want any more of these prints of darkness. William grimaced. It shows the truth, he thought. But how do we know the truth when we see it? The Ephebian philosophers think that a hare can never outrun a tortoise, and they can prove it. Is that the truth? I heard a wizard say that everything is made up of little numbers, whizzing around so fast that they become stuff. Is that true? I think a lot of things that have been happening over the last few days are not what they seem. And I don't know why I think that, but I think it's not the truth. Yes, no more of this stuff, Otto, he said. Damn right, said Good Mountain. Let's just try to get back to normal and get a paper out, shall we? You mean normal where mad priests start to collect dogs? Or normal where vampires mess around with evil shadows? Said Gowdy. I mean like normal before that, said William. Oh, I see, you mean like back in the old days, said Gowdy. After a while, though, silence settled on the press room, although there was an occasional sniff from the desk opposite. William wrote a story about the fire. That was easy. Then he tried to write a coherent account of the recent events, but found he couldn't get beyond the first word. He'd written the. It was a reliable word, the definite article. The trouble was, all the things he was definite about were bad. He'd expected to, what? Inform people, yes. Annoy people.
Okay, that confused me a
some
bit.
people at least. What he hadn't expected was that it wouldn't make any difference. The paper came out, and it didn't matter. People just seemed to accept things. What was the point of writing another story on the veterinary business? Well, of course it had a lot of dogs in it, and there was always a lot of human interest in a story about animals. What did you expect? Said Saccharissa, as if she was reading his thoughts. Do you think people will be marching in the streets?
Oh, fuck
Veterinary
off.
isn't a very nice man from what I hear. People say he probably
That's the
deserves
worst
a lot.
transformation I ever had,
Are
probably.
you saying people aren't interested in the truth? Listen, what's true to a lot of people is that they need money for the rent by the end of the week. Look at Mr. Ron and his friends. What's the truth mean to them? They live under a bridge. She held up a piece of lined paper, crammed edge to edge with the careful looped handwriting of someone for whom holding a pen was not a familiar activity. This is a report of the annual meeting of the Ankh-Morpork Caged Bird Society, she said. They're just ordinary people who breed canaries and things as a hobby. Their chairman lives next door to me, which is why he gave me this. This stuff is important to him. My goodness, but it's dull. It's all about best of breed and some changes in the show rules about parrots which they argued about for 2 hours. But the people who were arguing were people who mostly spend their day mincing meat or sawing wood and basically leading little lives that are controlled by other people. Do you see? They've got no say in who runs the city, but they can damn well see to it that cockatoos aren't lumped in with parrots. It's not their fault. It's how things are. Why are you sitting there with your mouth open like that? William closed his mouth. All right, I understand. No, I don't think you do, she snapped. I looked you up in Twerp's peerage. Your family have never had to worry about the small stuff, have they? They've been some of the people who really run things. This paper is a kind of hobby for you, isn't it? Oh, you believe in it, I'm sure you do. But if it all goes Wahoonie-shaped, you'll still have money. I won't. So if the way it can be kept going is by filling it with what you sneer at as olds, then that's what I'll do. I don't have money. I make my own living. Yes, but you were able to choose. Anyway, aristocrats don't like to see other toffs starving. They find them silly jobs to do for serious wages. She stopped, panting, and pushed some hair out of her eyes. Then she looked at him like someone who has lit the fuse and is now wondering if the barrel at the other end is bigger than they thought. William opened his mouth, went to shape a word and stopped. He did it again. Finally, a little hoarsely, he said, "You're more or less right. The next word's going to be but, I just know it," said Saccharissa. William was aware that the printers were all watching. "Yes, it is. Aha. But it's a big but. Do you mind? It's important. Someone has to care about the big truth. What veterinary mostly does not do is a lot of harm. We've had rulers who are completely crazy and very, very nasty. And it wasn't that long ago either. Veterinary might not be a very nice man, but I had breakfast today with someone who'd be a lot worse if he ran the city, and there are lots more like him. And what's happening now is wrong. And as for your damn parrot fanciers, if they don't care about anything much beyond things that go squawk in cages, then one day there'll be someone in charge of this place who'll make them choke on their own budgies. You want that to happen? If we don't make an effort, all they'll get is silly stories about talking dogs and elves ate my gerbil. So don't give me lectures on what's important and what's not. Understand?" They glared at one another. "Don't you talk to me like
Well,
that.
that's at least a
Don't you talk to
somewhat
me like
useful
that."
transformation.
"We're not getting enough advertising. The Inquirer's getting huge adverts from the big guilds," said Saccharissa. "That's what'll keep us going, not stories about how much gold weighs. What am I supposed to do about it? Find a way of getting more ads." "That's not my job," William shouted. "It's part of saving your job. We're just getting penny-a-line advertisements from people wanting to sell surgical supports and backache cures. So, the pennies add up. So, you want us to be known as the paper you can put your trusts in?" Excuse me, but are we producing an edition?" said Goodmountain. "Not that we aren't enjoying all this, but the colour's going to take a lot of extra time." William and Saccharissa looked round. They were the focus of attention. "Look, I know this means a lot to you," said Saccharissa, lowering her voice, "but all this political stuff, this is the Watch's job, not ours, that's all I'm saying." "They're stuck. That's what Vimes was telling me." Saccharissa stared at his frozen expression. Then she leaned over and, to his shock, patted his head. "Perhaps you are having an effect, then." "Ha! Well, if they're going to pardon Vetinari, maybe it's because they're worried about you." "Ha! Anyway, who are they?" "Well, you know, them. The people who run things. They notice things. They probably read the paper." William gave her a wan smile. "Tomorrow we'll find someone to get more ads," he said. "And we'll definitely need those extra staff. I'm going to go for a little walk," he added. "And I'll get you that key." "Key? You wanted a dress for the ball?" "Oh, yes, thank you." "And I don't think those men will be back," said William. "I've got a feeling that there isn't a shed anywhere in town that's as well guarded as this one right at the moment. Because Vimes is waiting to see who tries to get at us next," he thought. But he decided not to say so. "What exactly are you going to do?" said Saccharissa. "First, I'm going to the nearest apothecary," said William. "And then I'm going to drop in at my lodgings for that key. And then I'm going to see a man about a dog." The new firm hurtled through the door of the empty mansion and bolted it behind them. Mr. Tulip ripped off the Bride of Innocence outfit and hurled it on the floor. "I told you, clever plans never work," he said. "A vampire," said Mr. Pym. "This is a sick city, Mr. Tulip." "What was that he did to us?" "He took some kind of picture," said Mr. Pym. He closed his eyes for a moment. His head was aching. "Well, I was in disguise," said Mr. Tulip. Mr. Pym shrugged. Even with a metal bucket over his head, which would probably begin to corrode after a few minutes, there would be something recognizable about Mr. Tulip. "I don't think that will do any good," he said. "I hates pictures," snarled Mr. Tulip. "Remember that time in Moldavia? All them posters they did? It's bad for a man's health seeing his fizz on every wall with dead or alive under it. It's like they can't decide." Mr. Tulip fished out a small bag of what he had been assured was primo smudge, but which would turn out to be sugar and powdered pigeon guano. "Anyway, we must have got the dog," he said. "We can't be sure," said Mr. Pitt. He winced again. The headache was getting quite strong. "Look, we done that ing job, said Mr. Tulip. I don't recall no one telling us about ing werewolves and vampires. That's their ing problem. I say we scrag the geek, take the money and head for Pseudopolis or someplace.
You mean quit? On a contract?
Yeah, when it's got small print you can't ing see.
Someone will recognise Charlie, though. Seems it's hard for the dead to stay dead around here.
I reckon I could help in that ing respect, said Mr. Tulip.
Mr. Pin chewed his lip. He knew better than Mr. Tulip that men in their business needed a certain reputation. Things didn't get written down, but the word got about. The new firm sometimes dealt with very serious players, and they were people who took a lot of notice of the word. But Tulip did have a point. This place was getting to Mr. Pin. It jarred his sensibilities. Vampires and werewolves. Springing that sort of thing on a body, that wasn't according to the rules. That was taking liberties. Yes, there was more than one way to keep a reputation. I think we should go and explain things to our lawyer friend, he said slowly.
Right, said Mr. Tulip. And then I'll rip his head off.
That doesn't kill zombies.
Good, because then he'll be able to see where I'm gonna shove it.
And then we'll pay another visit to that newspaper, when it's dark, to get that picture, he thought. That was a good reason. It was a reason that you could tell the world. But there was another reason. That burst of darkness had frightened Mr. Pin to his shriveled soul. A lot of memories had come pouring back all at once. Mr. Pin had made a lot of enemies, but that hadn't worried him until now because all his enemies were dead. But the dark light had fired off bits of his mind, and it had seemed to him that those enemies had not vanished from the universe, but had merely gone a long way away, from which point they were watching him. And it was a long way away only from his point of view. From their point of view, they could reach out and touch him. What he wouldn't say, even to Mr. Tulip, was this. They'd need all the money from this job because in a flash of dark, he'd seen that it was time to retire. Theology was not a field in which Mr. Pin had much knowledge, despite accompanying Mr. Tulip to a number of the more well-designed temples and chapels, on one occasion to scrag a high priest who tried to double-cross Frank Nutboy Nabs, but the little he had absorbed was suggesting to him that this might be the very best time to take a bit of an interest. He could send them some money, maybe, or at least return some of the stuff he'd taken. Hell, maybe he could start not eating beef on Tuesday or whatever it was you had to do. Maybe that would stop this feeling that the back of his head had just been unscrewed. He knew that would have to be later, though. Right now, the code allowed them to do one of two things. They could follow Slant's instructions to the letter, which would mean they'd maintain a reputation for efficiency, or they could scrag Slant and maybe a few bystanders and leave, perhaps setting fire to a few things on the way out. That was also news that got around. People would understand how upset they were. But first we'll... Mr. Pin stopped, and in a strangled voice said, "Is someone standing behind me?"
No,
said Mr. Tulip. "I thought I heard footsteps."
no one here but us.
Right. Right. Mr. Pin shuddered, straightened his jacket, and then looked Mr. Tulip up and down. "Clean yourself up a bit, will you? Sheesh, you're leaking dust."
I can handle it, said Mr. Tulip. Keeps me sharp. Keeps me alert.
Pin sighed. Mr. Tulip had amazing faith in the contents of the next bag, whatever it was, and it was usually cat flea powder cut with dandruff. "Force isn't going to work on Slant," he said. Mr. Tulip cracked his knuckles.
Works on everyone,
he said. "No. A man like him will have a lot of muscle to call on," said Pin. He patted his jacket. "It's time Mr. Slant said hello to my little friend." A plank thumped down onto the crusted surface of the River Ank. Shifting his weight with care and gripping the rope tightly in his teeth, Arnold sideways swung himself onto it. It sank a little in the ooze, but stayed, for want of a better word, afloat. A few feet away, the depression that had been left by the first sack landing in the river was already filling up with, for want of a better word, water. He reached the end of the plank
steadied himself and managed to lasso the remaining sack. It was moving. "He's got it!" shouted the duckman, who was watching from under the bridge. "Heave away, everybody!" The sack came out of the muck with a sucking sound, and Arnold pulled himself aboard as it was dragged back to the bank. "Oh, very well done, Arnold," said the duckman, helping him off the sodden sack and back onto his trolley. "I really doubted if the surface would support you at this stage of the tide." "Bit of luck for me, eh, when that cart ran off my legs all them years ago," said Arnold sideways. "I'd have drowned else." Coffin Henry slit the sacking with his knife and tipped the second lot of little terriers onto the ground, where they coughed and sneezed. "One or two of the little buggers look done for," he said. "I'll give 'em mouth-to-mouth respiration, shall I?" "Certainly not, Henry," said the duckman. "Have you no idea of hygiene?" "Gino, you can't kiss dogs," said the duckman. "They would catch something dreadful." The crew looked at the dogs that were clustering around their fire. How the dogs had landed in the river was something they didn't bother to wonder about. All sorts of things landed in the river. It was the kind of thing that happened all the time. The crew took a keen interest in floating things, but it was unusual to get this many all at once. "Maybe it's been raining dogs," said altogether Andrews, who was being steered by the mind known as Curly. The crew liked Curly. He was easy to get along with. "I heard the other day that's been happening lately." "You know what?" said Arnold sideways. "What we ought to do, right, is get some stuff like wooden stuff and make a boat. We could get a lot more stuff if we had a boat." "Ah, yes," said the duckman. "I used to mess about in boats when I was a boy." "We could boat about in mess," said Arnold. "Same thing." "Not exactly," said the duckman. He looked at the circle of steaming, retching dogs. "I wish Gaspode was here," he said. "He knows how to think about this sort of thing." "A jar," said the apothecary carefully. "Sealed with wax," William repeated. "And you want an ounce each of oil of aniseed, oil of rampion, and oil of scalatine," said William. "I can do the first two," said the apothecary, looking at the little list he'd been given. "But there is no such thing as a whole ounce of oil of scalatine in the city, you realize. It's $15 for enough to go on a pinhead. We've got about enough to fill a mustard spoon, and we have to keep that in a soldered lead box underwater." "I'll take a pinhead's worth, then." "You'll never get it off your hands, you know. It isn't really for the average—" "In a bottle," said William patiently, "sealed with wax. You won't even smell the other oils. What do you want them for?" "Insurance," said William. "Oh, and after you've sealed it, wash off the bottle with ether, and then wash the ether off." "Is this going to be used for some illegal purpose?" said the apothecary. He caught William's expression. "Just interested," he added quickly. When he'd gone to make up the order, William called in at a couple of other shops and bought a pair of thick gloves. When he returned, the apothecary was just bringing the oils to the counter. He held a small glass flask filled with liquid. Inside floated a much smaller phial. "The outer liquid's water," he said, pulling some plugs out of his nose. "Take it carefully if you don't mind. Drop it, and we can kiss our sinuses goodbye." "What does it smell of?" said William. "Well, if I said cabbage," said the apothecary, "I wouldn't be saying the half of it." Next, William went to his lodgings. Mrs. Arcanum was averse to boarders coming back to their rooms during the day, but at the moment William appeared to be outside her frame of reference, and she merely gave him a nod as he went upstairs. The keys were in the old trunk at the end of his bed. It was the one he'd taken to Hugglestone's. He'd kept it ever since, so that he could kick it occasionally. His checkbook was also in there. He took that too. His sword rattled as his hand brushed against it. He'd enjoyed swordsmanship at Hugglestone's. It was in the dry. You were allowed to wear protective clothing, and no one attempted to stamp your face into the mud. He'd actually been the champion of the school, but this wasn't because he was much good. It was simply that most of the other boys were so bad. They approached the sport as they approached all others, in a great big, keen, screaming rush, using the sword as a sort of club. That meant that if William could avoid the first wild stroke, then he was going to win. He left the sword in the trunk. After some reflection, he pulled out one of his old socks and pulled it over the apothecary's bottle. Hurting people with broken glass wasn't part of the plan either. Peppermint. Not a bad choice, but they hadn't known what else was available, had they? Mrs. Arcanum was a great believer in net curtains, so that she could see out while outsiders couldn't see in. William lurked behind the ones in his room until he was certain that an indistinct shape amongst the rooftops opposite was a gargoyle. This wasn't natural gargoyle territory, any more than Gleam Street. The thing about gargoyles, he reflected as he stepped back and headed down the stairs, was that they didn't get bored. They were happy to stay and watch anything for days. But while they moved faster than people thought, they didn't move faster than people. He ran through the kitchen so quickly that he only heard Mrs. Arcanum gasp, and then he was through the back door and over the wall and into the alley beyond. Someone was sweeping it. For a moment, William wondered if it was a watchman in disguise, or even Sister Jennifer in disguise, but probably there was no one who disguised themselves as a gnoll. You'd have to strap a compost heap to your back to begin with. Gnolls ate almost everything. What they didn't eat, they collected obsessively. No one had ever studied them to find out why. Perhaps a carefully sorted collection of rotted cabbage stalks was a sign of big status in Gnoll society. "Hello, Mr. Word," croaked the creature, leaning on its shovel. Hello, Snake." "Ah, yes, thank you. Goodbye." He hurried down another alley, crossed the street and found yet another alley. He wasn't sure how many gargoyles were watching him, but it took them some time to cross streets. How was it that the Gnoll had known his name? It wasn't as though they'd met at a party or something. Besides, the Gnolls all worked for Harry King. Well, they did say that the King of the Golden River never forgot a debtor. William ducked and dodged across several blocks, making as much use as he could of the alleys and walk-throughs and noisome courts. He was sure a normal person wouldn't be able to keep track of him, but then he'd be amazed if a normal person was following him. Mr. Vimes liked to refer to himself as a simple copper, just as Harry King thought of himself as a rough diamond. William suspected that the world was littered with the remains of those people who had taken them at their word. He slowed down and climbed some outside stairs, and then he waited. "You're a fool," said the internal editor. "Some people have tried to kill you. You're concealing information from the Watch. You're mixing with strange people. You're about to do something that is going to get so far up Mr. Vimes's nose it will raise his hat. And why? Because it makes my blood tingle," he thought, "and because I'm not going to be used by anyone." There was a faint sound at the end of the alley, which might not have been heard by anyone who wasn't expecting it. It was the sound of something sniffing. William looked down and saw in the gloom a four-legged shape break into a trot while keeping its muzzle close to the ground. William measured the distance carefully. Declaring independence was one thing. Assaulting a member of the Watch was a very different thing. He lobbed the fragile bottle so that it would land 20 feet ahead of the werewolf. Then he dropped from the stairs onto the top of a wall and jumped down onto a privy roof just as the glass broke with a puff inside the sock. There was a yelp and the sound of scrabbling claws. William jumped from the roof and onto another wall, inched along the top of it, and climbed down into another alley, and then he ran. It took 5 minutes, dodging into convenient cover and cutting through buildings to arrive at the livery stables. In the general bustle, no one took any notice of him. He was just another man coming to fetch his horse. The stall that might or might not have contained deep bone was occupied by a horse now. It looked down its nose at him. "Don't turn around, Mr. Paperman," said a voice behind him. William tried to remember what had been behind him. Oh yes, the hay lift, and huge bags of straw. Plenty of room for someone to hide. "All right," he said. "Hark, hark, the dogs do bark," said Deepbone. "You must be mental." "But I'm on the right track," said William. "I think I've... Here. You
Oh, wait,
sure you
actually...
weren't followed?" "Corporal Nobbs was on my trail," said William, "but I shook him off." "Ha! Walking round the corner would shake off Nobby Nobbs." "Oh no, he kept right up. I knew Vimes would have me tracked," said William proudly. "By Nobbs?" "Yes. Obviously, in his werewolf shape." There, he'd said it. But today was a day for shadows and secrets. "A werewolf shape?" said Deepbone flatly. "Yes, I'd be grateful if you didn't tell anyone else." "Corporal Nobbs?" said Deepbone, still in the same dull monotone. "Yes, look, Vimes told me not to..." "Vimes told you Nobby Nobbs was a werewolf?" Well, no, not exactly. I worked that out for myself, and Vimes told me not to tell anyone else. About Corporal Nobbs being a werewolf? Yes. Corporal Nobbs is not a werewolf, mister, in any way, shape or form. Whether he's human is another matter, but he ain't a lycanthrope, a bloody werewolf, that's for sure. Then whose nose did I just drop a scent bomb in front of? Said William triumphantly. There was a silence, and then there was the sound of a thin trickle of water. Mr. Bone, said William. What kind of scent bomb? Said the voice. It sounded rather strained. I think oil of scalatine was probably the most active ingredient.
Why am I taking so much damage? What the fuck?
Nose. More or less, yes. Mr. Vimes is gonna go round a twist, said the voice of Deep Bone. He's gonna go totally librarian poo. He's gonna invent new ways of being angry just so he can try 'em out on you. Then I'd better get hold of Lord Veterinari's dog as soon as possible, said William. He produced his checkbook. I can give you a cheque for $50 and that's all I can afford. What's one of them then? It's like a legal IOU. Oh, great, said Deep Bone. Not much good to me when you're locked up, though. Right now, Mr. Bone, there's a couple of very nasty men hunting down every terrier in the city, by the sound of it. Terriers? Said Deep Bone. All terriers? Yes, and while I don't expect you to, like, pedigree terriers or just people who might happen to look a bit terrier-like. They didn't look like they were inspecting any paperwork. Anyway, what do you mean, people who look like terriers? Deep Bone went silent again. William said, $50, Mr. Bone. At length, the sacks of straw said, all right, tonight, on the Misbegot Bridge, just you. I won't be there, but there will be a messenger. Who shall I make the cheque to? Said William. There was no answer. He waited a while, and then eased himself into a position where he could peer around the sacks. There was a rustling from them. Probably rats, he thought, because certainly none of them could hold a man. Deep Bone was a very tricky customer. Some time after William had gone, looking surreptitiously into the shadows, one of the grooms turned up with a trolley and began to load up the sacks. One of them said, "Put me down, mister." The man dropped the sack and then opened it cautiously. A small terrier-like dog struggled out, shaking itself free of clinging wisps. Mr. Hobson did not encourage independence of thought and an inquiring mind, and at 50p a day plus all the oats you could steal, he didn't get them. The groom looked owlishly at the dog. "Did you just say that?" he said. "Course not," said the dog. "Dogs can't talk. Are you stupid or something? Someone's playing a trick on you. Got the gear. Big Viano." "You mean like throwing their voice? I saw a man do that down at a music hall." "That's a ticket. Hold on to that thought." The groom looked around. "Is that you playing a trick, Tom?" he said. "That's right. It's me, Tom," said the dog. "I got the trick out of a book. Throwing my voice into this harmless little dog what cannot talk at all." "What? You never told me you were learning to read?" "There were pictures," said the dog hurriedly. "Tongues and teeth and that. Dead easy to understand. Oh, now the little dog is wandering off." The dog edged its way to the door.
Yeah, Furiosa is the most
Sheesh,
rare boss that
it
everybody
began to say.
wants to
"A
get.
couple of thumbs and they're lords of bloody creation." Then it ran for it.
End of CD 7. CD 8.
"How will this work?" said Saccharissa, trying to look intelligent. It was much better to concentrate on something like this than think about strange men getting ready to invade again. "Slowly," mumbled Goodmountain, fiddling with the press. "You realize this means it'll take us much longer to print each paper?" "You wanted colour? I give you colour," said Otto sulkily. "You never said quick." Saccharissa looked at the experimental iconograph. Most pictures were painted in colour these days. Only really cheap imps painted in black and white, even though Otto insisted that monochrome was an art form in itself.
Okay, let's see. Party analyzer. Oh, where the fuck is it open? Ah, here. Oh shit, actually, if I'm gonna keep hunting. Yeah, that should work. If we reset when he comes back, then it should be okay.
Printing colour. 4 imps were sitting on the edge of it, passing a very small cigarette from hand to hand and watching with interest the work on the press. 3 of them wore goggles of coloured glass, red, blue and yellow. But not green, she said. So, if something's green, how have I got this right? Guthrie there sees the blue in the green and paints that on the plate in blue. One of the imps gave her a wave. And Anton sees the yellow and paints that. And when you run it through the press... Very, very slowly, muttered Goodmountain. It'd be quicker to go round everyone's house and tell them the news. Saccharissa looked at the test sheets that had been done of the recent fire. It was definitely a fire with red, yellow and orange flames, and there was some, yes, blue sky, and the golems were a pretty good reddish brown. The flesh tones, well... flesh-coloured was a bit of a tricky one in Ankh-Morpork, where if you picked your subject it could be any colour except maybe light blue. But the faces of many of the bystanders did suggest that a particularly virulent plague had passed through the city. Possibly the multi-coloured death, she decided. This is only the beginning, said Otto. We will get better. Better maybe. We're doing as fast as we can go, said Goodmountain. We can do maybe 200 an hour, maybe 250, but someone's going to be looking for their fingers before this day's out. Sorry, but we're doing the best we can. If we had a day to redesign and rebuild properly... Print a few hundred and do the rest in black and white then, said Saccharissa, and sighed. At least it'll catch people's attention. Once they see it, the Inquirer will work out how it was done, said Otto. Then at least we'll go down with our colours flying, said Saccharissa. She shook her head as a little dust floated down from the ceiling. Hark at that, said Bodney. Can you feel the floor shake? That's their big presses again. They're undermining us everywhere, said Saccharissa.
Why am I taking so much damage suddenly?
It's so unfair. I'm
It
surprised
seems
the
like I'm
Ford
taking
takes it,
an
said
unusual
Goodmountain.
amount of
It's not as
damage.
though anything's on solid ground round here. Undermining us, eh? Said Bodney. One or two of the dwarfs looked up when he said this. Bodney said something in dwarfish. Goodmountain snapped something in reply. A couple of other dwarfs joined in. Excuse me, said Saccharissa tartly. The lads were wondering about going in and having a look, said Goodmountain. I tried going in the other day, said Saccharissa, but the troll on the door was most impolite. Dwarfs approach matters differently, said Goodmountain. Saccharissa saw a movement. Bodney had pulled his axe out from under the bench. It was a traditional dwarf axe. One side was a pickaxe for the extraction of interesting minerals, and the other side was a war axe, because the people who own the land with the valuable minerals in it can be so unreasonable sometimes. You're not going to attack anyone, are you? She said, shocked. Well, someone did say that if you want a good story, you have to dig and dig, said Bodney. We're just going to go for a walk. In the cellar? Said Saccharissa as they headed for the steps. Yeah, a walk in the dark, said Bodney. Goodmountain sighed. The rest of us will get on with the paper, shall we? He said. After a minute or two, there was the sound of a few axe blows below them, and then someone swore in dwarfish very loudly. I'm going to see what they're doing, said Saccharissa, unable to resist any more, and hurried away. The bricks that had once filled the old doorway were already down when she got there. Since the stones of Ankh-Morpork were recycled over the generations, no one had ever seen the point of making strong mortar, and especially not for blocking up an old doorway. Sand, dirt, water, and phlegm would do the trick, they always felt. They'd always done up to now, after all. The dwarfs were peering into the darkness beyond. Each one had stuck a candle on his helmet. I thought your man said they filled up the old street, said Bodney. He's not my man, said Saccharissa evenly. What's in there? One of the dwarfs had stepped through with a lantern. There's like tunnels, he said. The old pavements, said Saccharissa. It's like this all around this area, I think. After the big floods, they built up the sides of the road with timber and filled it in, but they left the pavements on either side because not all the properties had built up yet and people objected.
Ow.
What? Said Bodney. You mean the roads were higher than the pavements? Oh, yes, said Saccharissa, following him into the gap. But what happened if a horse if a horse made water on the street? I'm sure I don't know, sniffed Saccharissa. How did people cross the street? Ladders. Oh, come on, miss. No, they used ladders and a few tunnels. It wasn't going to be for very long, and then it was simpler just to put heavy slabs over the old pavements. And so there's these, well, forgotten spaces. There's rats up here, said Dozy, who was wandering into the distance. Oh, damn, said Bodney. Anyone brought the cutlery? Only joking, miss. Hey, what do we have here? He hacked at some planks which crumbled away under the blows. Someone didn't want to use a ladder, he said, peering into another hole. It goes right under the street, said Saccharissa. Looks like it. Must have been allergic to horses. And, you can find your way? I'm a dwarf. We are underground. Dwarf. Underground. What was your question again? You're not proposing to hack through to the cellars of the Inquirer, are you? Said Saccharissa. Oh, us? You are, aren't you? We wouldn't do anything like that. Yes, but you are, aren't you? That'd be tantamount to breaking in, wouldn't it? Yes, and that's what you're planning to do, isn't it? Bodney grinned. Well, a little bit. Just have a look round, you know.
Good.
What, you don't mind?
You're not going to kill anyone, are you?
Miss, we don't do that sort of thing.
Saccharissa looked a little disappointed. She'd been a respectable young woman for some time. In certain people, that means there's a lot of damned-up disreputability just waiting to burst out. Well, perhaps just make them a bit sorry then.
Yes, we can probably do that.
The dwarfs were already creeping along the tunnel at the other side of the buried street. By the light of their torches, she saw old frontages, bricked-up doors, windows filled with rubble.
This should be about the right place,
Said Bodney, pointing to a faint rectangle filled with more low-grade brick. You're just going to break in, said Saccharissa.
We'll say we were lost,
Said Bodney. Lost underground? Dwarfs?
All right, we'll say we're drunk. People will believe that. Okay, lads.
The rotten bricks fell away. Light streamed out. In the cellar beyond, a man looked up from his desk, mouth open. Saccharissa squinted through the dust. You? She said. Oh, it's you, miss, said cut-me-own-throat Dibbler. Hello, boys, am I glad to see you? The crew were just leaving when Gaspard arrived at the gallop. He took one look at the other dogs that were huddled around the fire, then dived under the trailing folds of foul old Ron's dreadful coat and whined. It took some time for the whole of the crew to understand what was going on. These were, after all, people who could argue and expectorate and creatively misunderstand their way through a 3-hour argument after someone said good morning. It was the duckman who finally got the message. These men are hunting terriers, he said. Right, it was the bloody newspaper. You can't bloody trust people who write in newspapers. They threw these doggies in the river. Right, said Gaspard. It's all gone fruit-shaped. Well, we can protect you too. Yeah, but I've got to be out and about. I'm a figure in this town. I can't lie low. I need a disguise. Look, we could be looking at $50 here, right? But you need me to get it. The crew were impressed with this. In their cashless economy, $50 was a fortune.
Blow it,
said foul old Ron.
dog's a dog,
Said Arnold sideways.
on account of being called a dog.
Crowed Coffin Henry. That's true, said the duckman. A false beard isn't going to work. Well, your huge brains had better come up with something, because I'm staying put until you do, said Gaspard. I've seen these men. They are not nice. There was a rumble from Altogether Andrews. His face flickered as the various personalities reshuffled themselves and then settled into the waxy bulges of Lady Hermione. We could disguise him, she said. What could you disguise a dog as? Said the duckman. A cat? A dog is not just a dog, said Lady Hermione. I think I have an idea. The dwarfs were in a huddle when William got back. The epicentre of the huddle, its huddlee, turned out to be Mr. Dibbler, who looked just like anyone would look if they'd been harangued. William had never seen anyone to whom the word harangued could be so justifiably applied. It meant someone who had been talked at by Saccharissa for 20 minutes. Is there a problem? He said. Hello, Mr. Dibbler. Tell me, William, said Saccharissa while pacing slowly around Dibbler's chair, if stories were food, what kind of food would Goldfish Eats Cat be? What? William stared at Dibbler. Realization dawned. I think it would be a sort of long, thin kind of food, he said. Filled with rubbish of suspicious origin? Now, there's no need for anyone to take that tone, Dibbler began, and then subsided under Saccharissa's glare. Yes, but rubbish that's sort of attractive. You'd keep on eating it even though you wished you weren't, said William. What's going on here? Look, I didn't want to do it, Dibbler protested. Do what? Mr. Dibbler's been writing those stories for the Inquirer, said Sacharissa. I mean, no one believes what they read in the paper, right? Said Dibbler. William pulled up a chair and sat straddling it, resting his arms on the back. So, Mr. Dibbler, when did you start pissing in the fountain of truth? William, snapped Sacharissa. Look, times haven't been good, see, said Dibbler. And I thought, this news business, well, people like to hear about stuff from a long way away, you know? Like in the almanac. Plague of giant weasels in Hersheybar, said William. That's the style? Well, I thought, it doesn't sort of matter if they're, you know, really true. I mean, William's glassy grin was beginning to make Dibbler uncomfortable. I mean, they're nearly true, aren't they?
Everyone knows that sort of thing happens. You didn't come to me, said William. Well, of course not. Everyone knows you're a bit unimaginative about that sort of thing. You mean I like to know that things have actually happened? That's it, yes. Mr. Carney says people won't notice the difference anyway. He doesn't like you very much, Mr. De Word. He's got wandering hands, said Saccharissa. You can't trust a man like that. William pulled the latest copy of the Inquirer towards him and picked a story at random. Man stolen by demons, he said. This refers to Mr. Ronnie Trust Me Begholder, known to owe Chryso Praise the Troll more than $2,000, last seen buying a very fast horse. Well, where do the demons fit in? Well, he could have been stolen by demons, said Dibbler. It could happen to anybody. What you mean, then, is that there is no evidence that he wasn't stolen by demons.
Oh, fuck. Ooh.
That way, people can
That
make
was
up their
almost a
own
death
minds.
sentence, opening a menu by mistake.
That's what Mr. Carney says. People should be allowed to choose, he said. To choose what's true. He doesn't clean his teeth properly either, said Saccharissa. I mean, I'm not one of those people who think cleanliness is next to godliness, but there are limits. Classically, very few people have considered that cleanliness is next to godliness, apart from in a very sternly abridged dictionary. A rank loincloth and hair in an advanced state of matted entanglement have generally been the badges of office of prophets whose injunction to disdain earthly things starts with soap. Dibbler shook his head sadly. I'm losing my touch, he said. Imagine me working for someone. I must have been mad. It's the cold weather getting to me, that's what it is. Even wages, he said the word with a shudder, looked attractive. Do you know, he added in a horrified voice, he was telling me what to do. Next time I'll have a quiet lie down until the feeling goes away. You are an immoral opportunist, Mr. Dibbler, said William. It's worked so far. Can you sell some advertising for us? Said Saccharissa. I'm not going to work for anyone on commission, snapped Saccharissa. What? You want to employ him? Said William. Why not? You can tell as many lies as you like if it's advertising. That's allowed, said Saccharissa. Please, we need the money. Commission, eh? Said Dibbler, rubbing his unshaven chin. Like 50% for you two and 50% for me too? We'll discuss it, shall we? Said Goodmountain, patting him on the shoulder. Dibbler winced. When it came to hard bargaining, dwarfs were diamond tipped.
Oh shit.
Have I got a choice? He mumbled. Goodmountain leaned forward. His beard was bristling. He wasn't currently holding a weapon, but Dibbler could see, as it were, the great big axe that wasn't there. Absolutely, he said. Oh, said Dibbler. So, what would I be selling exactly? Space, said Saccharissa. Dibbler beamed again. Just space? Nothing? Oh, I can do that. I can sell nothing like anything. He shook his head sadly. It's only when I try to sell something that everything goes wrong. How did you come to be here, Mr. Dibbler? William asked. He was not happy with the answer. That sort of thing could work both ways, he said. You can't just dig into other people's property. He glared at the dwarfs. Mr. Boddeney, I want that hole blocked up right now. Understand? Wait. Yes, you did it for the best. And now I want it bricked up properly. I want the hole to look as though it had never been there, thank you. I don't want anyone coming up the cellar ladder that didn't climb down it. Right now, please. I think I'm onto a real story, said William, as the disgruntled dwarfs filed away. I think I'm going to see Waffles. I've got... As he pulled out his notebook, something dropped onto the floor with a tinkle. Oh, yes, and I got the key to our town house, he said. You wanted a dress. It's a bit late, said Saccharissa. I'd forgotten all about it, to tell the truth. Why not go and have a look while everyone else is busy? You could take Rocky, too, you know, to be on the safe side. But the place is empty. My father stays at his club if he has to come to town. Go on. There's got to be more to life than correcting copy. Saccharissa looked uncertainly at the key in her hand. My sister has quite a lot of dresses, said William. You want to go to the ball, don't you? I suppose Mrs. Hotbed could alter it for me if I take it to her in the morning, said Saccharissa, expressing mildly peeved reluctance whilst her body language begged to be persuaded. That's right, said William. And I'm sure you can find someone to do your hair properly. Saccharissa's eyes narrowed. It's true, you know. You have got an amazing way with words, she said. What are you going to do? I'm going, said William, to see a dog about a man. Sergeant Angua peered up at Vimes through the steam from the bowl in front of her. Sorry about this, sir, she said. His feet won't touch the ground, said Vimes. You can't arrest him, sir, said Captain Carrot, putting a fresh towel over Angua's head. Oh? Can't arrest him for assaulting an officer, eh? Well, that's where it gets tricky, doesn't it, sir, said Angua. You're an officer, Sergeant, whatever shape you happen to be currently in. Yes, but it's always been a bit convenient to let the werewolf thing stay a rumour, sir, said Carrot. Don't you think so? Mr. De Word writes things down. Angua and I aren't particularly keen on that. Those who need to know, know. Then I'll ban him from doing it. How, sir? Vimes looked a little deflated. You can't tell me that as Commander of Police I can't stop some little... some idiot from writing down anything he likes? Oh, no, sir, of course you can. But I'm not sure you can stop him writing down that you stopped him writing things down, said Carrot. I'm amazed. Amazed. She's your friend, said Angua, taking another deep sniff of the steam. But Carrot's right, Mr. Vimes. I don't want this going any further. It was my fault for underestimating him. I walked right into it. I'll be fine in an hour or two. I saw what you were like when you came in, said Vimes. You were a mess. It was a shock. The nose just shuts down. It was like walking round a corner and running into foul old Rod. Yea, gods, that bad? Maybe not quite as bad as that. Let it lie, sir, please. He's a quick learner, our Mr. De Word, said Vimes, sitting down at his desk. He's got a pen and a printing press, and everyone acts like he's suddenly a major player. Well, he's going to have to learn a bit more. He doesn't want us watching. Well, we won't anymore. He can reap what he sows for a while. We've got more than enough other things to do, heaven knows. But he is technically... See this sign on my desk, Captain? See it, Sergeant? It says Commander Vimes. That means the buck starts here. It was a command you just got. Now, what else is new? Carrot nodded. Nothing good, sir. No one's found the dog. The guilds are all battening down. Mr. Scrope has been getting a lot of visitors. Oh, and High Priest Ridcully is telling everyone that he thinks Lord Vetinari went mad because the day before he'd been telling him about a plan to make lobsters fly through the air. Lobsters flying through the air, said Vimes flatly. And something about sending ships by semaphore, sir. Oh, dear. And what is Mr. Scrope saying? Apparently he says he's looking forward to a new era in our history and will put Ankh-Morpork back on the path of responsible citizenship, sir. Is that the same as the lobsters? It's political, sir. Apparently he wants to return to the values and traditions that made the city great, sir. Does he know what those values and traditions were? Said Vimes aghast. I assume so, sir, said Carrot, keeping a straight face. Oh my gods, I'd rather take a chance on the lobsters. It was sleeting again out of a darkening sky. The misbegot bridge was more or less empty. William lurked in the shadows, his hat pulled down over his eyes. Eventually, a voice out of nowhere said, So, you got your bit of paper? Deep bone, said William, startled out of the reverie. I'm sending A guide for you to follow, said the hidden informant. Name of Trixie Bell. Just you follow him and everything will be okay. Ready? Yes. Deepbone is watching me, William thought. He must be really close. Trixie Bell trotted out of the shadows. It was a poodle, more or less. The staff at Le Poil du Chien, the doggy beauty salon, had done their very best, and a craftsman will give of his or her all if it means getting foul old Ron out of the shop any faster. They'd cut, blown, permed, crimped, coloured, woven, shampooed, and the manicurist had locked herself in the lavatory and refused to come out. The result was pink. The pinkness was only one aspect of the thing, but it was so pink that it dominated everything else, even the topiary effect's tail with the fluffy knob on the end. The front of the dog looked as though it had been fired through a large pink ball and had only got halfway. Then there was also the matter of the large glittery collar. It glittered altogether too much. Sometimes glass glitters more than diamonds because it has more to prove. All in all, the effect was not of a poodle, but of malformed poodlosity. That is to say, everything about it suggested poodle, except for the whole thing itself, which suggested walking away. Yip, it said. And there was something wrong with this too. William was aware that dogs like this yipped, but this one, he was sure, had said yip. There's a good... he began and finished. Dog? Yip, 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 sheesh, yip, said the dog and walked off. William wondered about the sheesh, but decided the dog must have sneezed. It trotted away through the slush and disappeared down an alley. A moment later, its muzzle appeared round the corner. Yip, wine? Oh, yes, sorry, said William. Trixie Bell led the way down greasy steps to the old path that ran along Riverside. It was littered with rubbish, and anything that stays thrown away in Ankh-Morpork is real rubbish. The sun seldom got down here, even on a fine day. The shadows contrived to be freezing and running with water at the same time. Nevertheless, there was a fire among the dark timbers under the bridge. William realised as his nostrils shut down that he was visiting the canting crew. The old towpath had been deserted to start with, but foul old Ron and the rest of them were the reason it stayed that way. They had nothing to steal. They had precious little even to keep. Occasionally the Beggars' Guild considered running them out of town, but without much enthusiasm. Even beggars need someone to look down on, and the crew were so far down that in a certain light they sometimes appeared to be on top. Besides, the guild recognised craftsmanship when they saw it. No one could spit and ooze like Coffin Henry. No one could be as legless as Arnold Sideways, and nothing in the world could smell like foul old Ron. He could have used oil of scalatine as a deodorant. And as that thought tripped through William's brain, he knew where Waffles was. Trixie Bell's ridiculous pink tail disappeared into the mass of old packing cases and cardboard, known variously to the crew as what? Bagrick, Patooey, and Home. William's eyes were already watering. There wasn't much breeze down here. He made his way into the pool of firelight. Oh, good evening, gentlemen, he managed, nodding to the figures around the green-edged flames. Let's see the colour of your bit of paper, commanded the voice of Deepbone from out of the shadows. It's, off-white, said William, unfolding the cheque. It was taken by the Duckman, who scanned it carefully and added noticeably to its off-whiteness. It seems to be in order. $50 signed, he said. I have explained the concept to my associates, Mr. De Word. It was not easy, I have to tell you. Yeah, and if you don't put up, we'll come to your house, said Coffin Henry. And do what? Said William. Stand outside forever and ever and ever, said Arnold Sideways. Looking at people in a funny way, said the Duckman. Going on their boots, said Coffin Henry. William tried not to think about Mrs. Arcanum. He said, Now can I see the dog? Show him, Ron, commanded the voice of Deepbone. Ron's heavy coat fell open, revealing Waffles blinking in the firelight. You had him, said William. That was all there was to it. Bagrit. Who's going to search foul old Ron? Said Deepbone. Good point, said William. Very good point. All smell him out. Now, you got to remember he's old, said Deepbone. And he wasn't exactly Mr. Brain to start with. I mean, we're talking dogs here. Not talking dogs, said the voice hurriedly, but talking about dogs, I mean. So don't expect a philosophical treatise, is what I'm saying. Waffles begged geriatrically when he saw William looking at him. How did he come to be with you? Said William as Waffles sniffed his hand. He came running out of the palace straight under Ron's coat, said Deepbone. Which is, as you point out, the last place anyone would look, said William. You'd better believe it. And not even a werewolf would find him there. William took out his notebook, turned to a fresh page and wrote, Waffles. He said, how old is he? Waffles barked. 16, said Deepbone. Is that important? It's a newspaper thing, said William. He wrote, Waffles 16, formerly of the Palace, Ankh-Morpork. I'm interviewing a dog, he thought. Man interviews dog. That's nearly news. So, Waffles, what happened before you ran out of the palace? He said. Deepbone from his hiding place whined and growled. Waffles cocked an ear and then growled back. He woke up and experienced a moment of horrible philosophical uncertainty, said Deepbone. I thought you said, I'm translating, right? And this was on account of there being two gods in the room. That's two Lord Veterinaries, Waffles being an old-fashioned kind of dog. But he knew one was wrong because he smelled wrong. And there were two other men. And then... William scribbled furiously. 20 seconds later, Waffles bit him hard on the ankle. The clerk in Mr. Slant's front office looked down from his high desk at the two visitors, sniffed and carried on with his laborious copperplate. He did not have a lot of time for the notion of customer service. The law could not be hurried. A moment later, his head was rammed into the desktop and held down by some enormous weight. Mr. Pin's face appeared in his limited vision. I said, said Mr. Pin, that Mr. Slant wants to see us, said the clerk. Mr. Pin nodded, and the pressure was relieved slightly. Sorry, you were saying, said Mr. Pin, watching the man's hand creep along the edge of the desk. He's not seeing anyone. The words ended in a muffled yelp. Mr. Pin leaned down. Sorry about the fingers, he said, but we can't have them naughty little things creeping to that little lever down there, can we? No telling what might happen if you pulled that lever. Now, which one's Mr. Slant's office? Second door on left, the man groaned. See, it's so much nicer when we're polite. And in a week, 2 at the outside, you'll be able to pick up a pen again. Mr. Pin nodded to Mr. Tulip, who let the man go. He slithered to the floor. You want I should scrag him? Leave him, said Mr. Pin. I think I'm going to be nice to people today. He had to hand it to Mr. Slant. When the new firm stepped into his office, the lawyer looked up and his expression barely flickered. Gentlemen, he said. Don't press a thing, said Mr. Tulip. There's something you should know, said Mr. Pin, pulling a box out of his jacket. And what is that? Said Mr. Slant. Mr. Pin flicked a catch on the side of the box. Let's hear about yesterday, he said. The imp blinked. Nip, 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 it said. It's just working its way backwards, said Mr. Pin. What is this? Said the lawyer. Nip, 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 nip. Is valuable, Mr. Pin, so I will not spin this out. What did you do with the dog? Mr. Pin's finger touched another lever. My clients have long memories and deep pockets. Other killers can be hired. Do you understand me? There was a tiny ouch as the off lever hit the imp on the head. Mr. Slant got up and walked across to an ancient cabinet. Would you like a drink, Mr. Pin? I am afraid I have only embalming fluid. Not yet, Mr. Slant. And I think I probably have a banana somewhere. Mr. Slant turned, smiling beatifically at the sound of the smack of Mr. Pin catching Mr. Tulip's arm. I told you I'm gonna kill him. Too late, alas, said the lawyer, sitting down again. Very well, Mr. Pin. This is about money, is it? All widowed, plus another 50,000. But you haven't found the dog. Nor have the watch, and they've got a werewolf. Everyone's looking for the dog. The dog's gone, but that doesn't matter. This little box matters.
That is very little in the way of evidence.
Really? You asking us about the dog? Talking about killers? I reckon that Vime's character will niggle away at something like that. He doesn't sound like the sort to let things go. Mr. Pym smiled humorlessly. You've got stuff on us, but, well, between you and me, he leaned closer. Some of the things we've done might be considered, well, tantamount to crimes. All them murders for a start, said Mr. Tulip, nodding. Which, since we are criminals, could be called typical behaviour, whereas, Mr. Pym went on, you're a respectable citizen. Doesn't look good. Respectable citizens getting involved in this sort of thing. People talk.
To save misunderstandings, said Mr. Slant, I will do you a draft of...
Jewels, said Mr. Pym. We like jewels, said Mr. Tulip.
You have made copies of that thing,
said Slant. I'm not saying anything, said Mr. Pym, who hadn't, and didn't even know how. But he took the view that Mr. Slant was in no position to be other than cautious, and it looked as though Mr. Slant thought so too.
I wonder if I can trust you,
said Mr. Slant, as if to himself. Well, you see, it's like this, said Mr. Pym as patiently as he could. His head was feeling worse. If news got around that we'd shopped a client, that wouldn't be good. People would say, you can't trust a person of that kind of ilk. They do not know how to behave. But if the people we deal with heard we'd scragged a client because the client had not played fair, then they would say to themselves, these are businessmen. They are businesslike. They do business. He stopped and looked at the shadows in the corner of the room.
and
Said Mr. Slant. And... The hell with this, said Mr. Pym, blinking and shaking his head. Give us the jewels, Slant, or Mr. Tulip will do the asking, understand? We're getting out of here with your damn dwarfs and your damn vampires and trolls and dead men walking. This city gives me the creeps. So give me the diamonds right now.
very well.
Said Mr. Slant. And the imp? It goes with us. We get caught, it gets caught. We die mysteriously, then some people find out about things. When we are safely away, you're in no position to argue, Slant. Mr. Pym shuddered. I am not having a good day. Mr. Slant pulled open a desk drawer and tossed 3 small velvet bags onto the leather top. Mr. Pym mopped his brow with a handkerchief. Take a look at them, Mr. Tulip. There was a pause while both men watched Mr. Tulip pour the gems into one enormous palm. He scrutinised several through an eyeglass. He sniffed at them. He gingerly licked 1 or 2. Then he picked 4 out of the heap and tossed them back to the lawyer. You think I'm some kind of a idiot, he said. Don't even think of arguing, said Mr. Pym.
Perhaps the jeweller's made a mistake,
said Mr. Slant. Yeah? Said Mr. Pym. His hand darted into his jacket again, but this time came out holding a weapon. Mr. Slant looked into the muzzle
my
of the
screen went
spring
black.
gun. It was technically and legally a crossbow, in that human strength compressed the spring, but it had been reduced by patience technology to a point where it was more or less a pipe with a handle and a trigger. Anyone caught with one by the Assassins' Guild, it was rumoured, would find its ability to be hidden on the human body tested to extremes. Any city watch that found one used against them would see to it that the offender's feet did not touch the ground, but instead swung gently as the breeze pushed them around. There must have been a switch in this desk too. A door flew open and 2 men burst in, one armed with 2 long knives, one with a crossbow. It was quite horrible what Mr. Tulip did to them. It was, in its way, a kind of skill. When an armed man runs into a room in the knowledge that there is going to be trouble, he needs a fraction of a second to assess, to decide, to calculate, to think. Mr. Tulip didn't need a fraction of a second. He didn't think. His hands moved by themselves. It required, even for the calculating eyes of Mr. Slant, a mental action replay. and even in the slow-mo of horror, it was hard to see Mr. Tulip grab the nearest chair and swing it. At the end of the blur, two men lay unconscious, one with an arm twisted in a disconcerting way, and a knife was shuddering in the ceiling. Mr. Pin hadn't turned round. He kept the gon pointed at the zombie. But he produced from a pocket a small cigarette lighter in the shape of a dragon. And then Mr. Slant. Mr. Slant, who crackled when he walked and smelled of dust. Mr. Slant saw, wrapped around the evil little bolt that just projected from the tube, a wad of cloth. Without taking his eyes off the lawyer, Mr. Pin applied the flame. The cloth flared, and Mr. Slant was very dry indeed. "This is a bad thing I'm about to do," Pin said, as if hypnotized. "But I've done so many bad things, this one will hardly count. It's like a killing is a big thing, but another killing, that's kind of half the size, you know? So it's like, when you've done 20 killings, they barely notice on average. But it's a nice day today. The birds is singing. There's stuff like kittens and stuff. And the sun is shining off the snow, bringing the promise of spring to come with flowers and fresh grass and more kittens and hot summer days and the gentle kiss of the rain and wonderful clean things which you won't ever see if you don't give us what's in that drawer, 'cause you'll burn like a torch, you double-dealing, twisty, dried-up, cheating son of a bitch." Mr. Slant scrabbled in the drawer and threw down another velvet bag. Glancing nervously at his partner, who'd never even mentioned kittens before, except in the same sentence as water barrel, Mr. Tulip took it and examined the contents. "Rubies," he said. "In good ones."
"Now go away from here," rasped Mr. Slant. "Right away. Never come back. I've never heard of you. I've never seen you."
He stared at the spluttering flame. Mr. Slant had faced many bad things in the last few hundred years, but right now nothing seemed more menacing than Mr. Pin, or more erratically deranged either. The man was swaying, and his gaze kept flickering into the shadowy corners of the room. Mr. Tulip shook his partner's shoulder. "Let's scrag him and go," he suggested. Pin blinked. "Right," he said, appearing to return to his own head. "Right." He glanced at the zombie. "I think I shall let you live today," he said, blowing out the flame. "Tomorrow, who knows?" It wasn't a bad threat, but somehow his heart wasn't in it. Then the new firm had gone. Mr. Slant sat down and stared at the closed door. It was clear to him, and a dead man has experience in these matters, that his two armed clerks, veterans of many a legal battle, were beyond help. Mr. Tulip was an expert. He took a sheet of writing paper from a drawer, wrote a few words in block letters, sealed it in an envelope and sent for another clerk.
"Have arrangements made," he said, when the man stared at his fallen colleagues. "And then take this to the word."
Which one, sir?" For a moment, Slant had forgotten that point.
"Lord Durward," he said. "Definitely not the other one."
William Durward turned a page in his notebook and continued to scribble. The crew were watching him as if he was a public entertainment.
"That's a grand gift you have there, sir," said Arnold sideways. "It does the art good to see the pencil waggling like that. I wish I had the knowing of it, but I've never been mechanical." "Would you care for a cup of tea?" said the Duckman. "You drink tea down here?" "Of course, why not? What kind of people do you think we are?" The Duckman held up a blackened teapot and a rusty mug with an inviting smile. It was probably a good moment to be polite, thought William. Besides, the water would have been boiled, wouldn't it? "No milk, though," he said quickly. He could imagine what the milk would be like. "Ah, I said you were a gentleman," said the Duckman, pouring a tarry brown liquid into the mug. "Milk in tea is an abomination." He picked up, with a dainty gesture, a plate and pair of tongs. "Slice of lemon," he added. "Lemon? You have lemon?" "Oh, even Mr. Ron here would rather wash under his arms than have anything but lemon in his tea," said the Duckman, plopping a slice into William's mug.
"And 4 sugars," said Arnold sideways. William took a deep draught of the tea. It was thick and stewed, but it was also sweet and hot, and slightly lemony. All in all, he considered, it could have been much worse. Yes, we're very fortunate when it comes to slices of lemon, said the duckman, busily fussing over the tea things. Why, it is indeed a bad day when we can't find 2 or 3 slices floating down the river. William stared fixedly at the river wall. Spit or swallow, he thought, the eternal conundrum. Are you all right, Mr. De Word? Too much sugar? Not too hot. William gratefully sprayed the tea in the direction of the river. Ah, he said, yes, too hot. That's what it was. Too hot. Lovely tea, but too hot. I'll just put the rest down here by my foot to cool down, shall I? He snatched up his pencil and pad. So, Waffles, which man was it that you bit on the leg? Waffles barked. He bit all of them, said the voice of Deepbone. When you're biting, why stop? Would you know them if you bit them again? He says he would. He says the big man tasted of, you know... Deepbone paused. Like a, what's name? Big bowl with hot water and soap in it. A bath? Waffles growled. That'd be the word, said Deepbone. And the other one smelled of cheap hair oil. And when he looked like Lord Veterinary, he smelled of wine. Wine? Yeah. Waffles also says he'd like to apologise for biting you just now, but he got carried away with the recollection. We, that is to say, dogs, have very physical memories, if you see what I mean. William nodded and rubbed his leg. The description of the invasion of the oblong office had been carried out in a succession of yelps, barks and growls, with Waffles running around in circles and snapping at his own tail until he bumped into William's ankle. And Ron's been carrying him around in his coat ever since. No one bothers foul old Ron, said Deepbone. I believe you, said William. He nodded at Waffles. I want to get an iconograph of him, he said. This is amazing stuff, but we must have a picture to prove that I've really talked to Waffles. Well, via an interpreter, obviously.
I'll need to cancel my next booking. Okay, there it is. I'll end the stream here. Thanks for watching, guys. And thanks for the follow. See you later.